I'll call to order this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole for November 15th, 2021. And could we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Ms. Wu?
Here.
Mr. Evans?
Here.
Ms. Hersey? Ms. Colasetti?
Here.
Ms. Bishop?
Here.
Ms. Wilkin?
Here.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Here.
Mayor Marlin?
Here.
With that, we have a quorum, and next is approval of the minutes. Could we have a motion?
I'll move approval of the minutes. You sent out some corrections and I'll include those in the motion.
I'll second. Okay, any discussion? Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Wu?
Yes.
Mr. Evans?
Yes.
Ms. Hersey?
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti?
Yes.
Ms. Bishop?
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry?
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin?
Yes. Thank you. Those are approved. And next is additions to the agenda. Do we have any additions or changes to the agenda? I saw Chris first, and then we'll go with the mayor. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, I would like to add to the agenda a 10-minute presentation by Brian Hoffer, who is chair of the Oakland Privacy Advisory Commission and the chair and executive director of Secure Justice. His advocacy has been instrumental in a number of nation-leading ordinances, including ones that established a vetting framework for the potential acquisition and use of surveillance equipment. Mr. Hoffer is presently consulting with the cities of San Diego, San Jose, Los Angeles, and Portland on establishing similar frameworks. I'd like to allow him to have a 10-minute presentation on the topic of automatic license plate readers. Thank you.
Okay. Maris, was that about this one?
Yes. Yes. I just wanted some more details in terms of what this presentation is. Is it a presentation on items to consider in an ordinance, or is it a presentation on a group? What, if you could provide some more details on that?
Yeah, Mary Alice, it's not a presentation about a group. He is an expert on the issues that cities and municipalities have about license plate readers. He's going to talk about his dealing with license plate readers. He's advised over 24 municipalities in California. And so I think he's got some expertise to offer us.
So I'm just wondering if that would be more appropriate for public input rather than a presentation.
Well, I'm asking for a presentation because of his expertise. I'm asking for 10 minutes instead of 4.
And I think for committee, it's just one council member to request an addition. So that goes. And Mayor, did you have another thing?
Yes, I wanted to pull item number 9 from the agenda. This is ordinance 2021-11-048, which is the omnibus budget amendment that will be rescheduled to be on the committee of the whole meeting on December 6th.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? I would like to switch the order of the discussion items, just switch A and B around. And with no other additions or changes, that brings us to discussion. And if we're going with that one first, this would be discussion item on public safety evaluation, scope of work discussion, and we have Chandra leading that.
Hi, so I believe that all the council members received an email with a draft scope of work, and this is pertaining to the public safety evaluation that we as a council put forth and approved back in June, was it? Around sort of figuring out more and different options around public safety. Thank you, Grace. Just wanted to have a brief discussion around it, if there was any other input or suggestions around this before we turn it over to staff to sort of release, I guess. Has everyone had the opportunity to read through it a bit? I don't need to go line by line.
I haven't had the opportunity to read through it.
Yes, Mary Alice.
I think James was first.
Oh, sorry. When I'm sharing, I can't see everyone. Sorry. James, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that Grace and I did have a chance to talk about this. And I do have some addition that I'd like to make to the background, which I will try to get to Grace or to you, Chandra, hopefully soon in the next day or two. I just feel like that the complexity of someone coming in to help us with this has to include some of the relationship with our Twin City Champaign, the relationship that this has with some of the county operations, and I just wanted to add a little bit to the background on that complexity of looking at this. You can't just look at it solely in the context of what Urbana does. I know we're focusing on what Urbana needs to do for ourselves, but we don't do this without impacts on us and by us with some of the neighboring municipality.
Thank you. Mary Alice, did you want to go?
Yeah, first I want to say, Chandra and Grace, thank you for giving us something to think about here in terms of this and moving this forward. I just kind of wanted to confirm that the purpose of this is to understand how we deliver public safety right now, to look and see if there are more effective ways and more equitable ways that we could be delivering safety for the furtherance of the community safety. So I just wanted to confirm that that is kind of the gist of what we're asking for.
That's correct. Looking at what we do now, and then seeking recommendations on how we can, I guess, better improve the services of public safety.
Okay, so I have I'm not going to bog us down with little edits and so forth, but I do plan to kind of tighten that up a little bit because I think that some of the things that are in background are, should be in statement of purpose, and some of the scope of work could be a little bit expanded a bit to incorporate those things. But I just wanted to confirm that that was the purpose of this document. So I'm happy to share those items, just my suggestions are for some edits. So I'll give you an example under the scope of work includes, but it's not limited to, the second one says data collection and synthesis related to elevating racial equity and social justice. I think we need to put public service in there, right? So data collection and synthesis, understanding public service. I'm sorry, not public service, my bad. Understanding public safety and methods to increase it, elevating racial equity and social justice. So I just want to frame it in that. And the other thing that I was thinking about, and maybe this is a question for staff, the RFPs, would they come to City Council for final approval before the contract is awarded?
I think that's a good question. Did someone want to answer that?
Yeah, is Carol on tonight?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that since this is very much a council initiative, you should be involved in the selection of the consultant that we hire for it. So we'd have to work out what that process might look like, because I don't know that it's fair to everybody who makes a proposal to be vetted publicly. But certainly, maybe if there were a couple that you wanted to ask questions of in a public setting, that might be useful. But we can talk about that. But I don't have any problem with you all being involved and there being some sort of public, sort of finalizing of the scope with one or more preferred consultants.
Okay, all right, and we're looking for, actually, could you scroll up? Who has this on the, I don't know if Grace or, thank you. So at the very top, it says we're searching for an organization. We're searching for an organization or a consulting group, is that right?
I think it's organization, group, person. I think we left it broad. And as you said before, this is just a very rough draft, a starting point. So we wanted to get something on paper so that we can get this process moving. And so edits, input is all very welcome. So if, like you say, you can just submit changes or edits as you want.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the weeds. I'm just trying to think of, big broad topics here in terms of what's the goal, who do we want to do it, and what is the process for moving forward with it. So, okay,
I think
thank
we
you.
put organization in case it was a consulting group or, sometimes it's an individual, whatever. We just left it broad.
Okay.
And Mayor, did you want to add something?
Sure. In terms of moving this along, once the council has submitted all your proposed edits, changes, suggestions, and is Chandra, are you the point person for this or someone?
Yes, I can be, yeah.
Okay, well, I think it would work best if one or two council members then set up a time to meet with staff to present the scope of work, and then we'll take it from there as far as drafting an RFP and making sure it's legally sufficient. It probably does need to be fleshed out some from what you've got here. So it may involve some back and forth, but once the scope is where you think it covers at least the broad parts of it, then it can head to staff to do the RFP, and then we'll involve council going forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sharice, did you have a hand up?
I guess I'm really, I'm kind of lost in finding the document itself.
Sure.
Was that what you sent last week?
Yeah, I sent it last week and also
The week before? Yeah, the meeting before.
But I can also definitely resend that.
Could you please, because I'm looking through, and I go through my emails all the time, but I'm not seeing it. Did it come from you, Grace, or did it come from Chandra?
I think that was from me.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know if I can do that in the meeting, but I can send that afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd reiterate what Chandra said, that there's still plenty of room for input and additions or anything else. So if you want to compile and send those to Chandra, I think there's still time to make plenty of changes. We just wanted to have something to look at. And then I had some thoughts or clarifications there, because it sounded like Mary Alice's question I thought was kind of like, will we review the final request for proposal before it goes out? And I also heard kind of an answer about council making a final selection. And I feel like those are kind of two different things. I don't know how people stand. I would like to have a look over before the final request for proposal goes out, just to look it over and be sure that that's what we were intending. And then for council to be involved in, council making the selection of where we go. So I don't know if other council members had thoughts on that, or if staff wanted to clarify how they saw that process going.
Sorry, I found myself choking a little bit.
Take your time. You have the floor when you're ready.
Sorry. I think the purpose, and the mayor asking about having a point of contact is for the back and forth. But once we finalize, once we finalize the RFP, I have no problem circulating it back. Sorry.
Okay, and then how about for final decision? Were you imagining, you said that some would be vetted and then the rest presented to council?
Yes. I mean, if you want to see them all, that's fine too. This is basically us facilitating a process for you.
Yeah, I would be interested in at least knowing all the ones that apply. And yeah, I'd be interested in seeing them all. Chris?
Carol, do you have any idea how many people would reply to our RFP? Would it be a lot?
I have no idea whether or not people from out of town are going to be interested in doing this work, but there are a number of consultants who've been doing this around the country. So we'll just have to see. We'll spread it as widely as possible.
And I had another question too, if you had an idea of how long it would take to get the RFP up and, ready for people to apply once we get the language figured out.
I would think it could be, well, I think once we get the language sorted out and whoever we're working with can respond to us relatively quickly with addition, after we put the whole RFP together, I would think you all might have it for a week or two, and then we can get it out. Once it's finalized, it's pretty easy to post. But I think we would want it to be posted for at least 30 days so that we could advertise it as widely as possible, and then people could put thoughtful responses together.
Thank you. I agree. So you said it'd probably be open for at least 30 days for people to put in a proposal. And once we get the language finalized, posting it would be about a week or so. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. James?
Yeah, Carol, could you tell us a little bit about how the question and answer process works with city RFPs?
We take questions from people who are interested, and then we answer them and issue them out to all of the people who've requested the RFP. So we don't do one-off questions and answers. If you ask a question, everyone who's intending to respond, and we have a way of monitoring who gets the RFP, then everybody gets a response. So that if somebody says, what did you mean by this paragraph? Everybody has the benefit of that answer, and we can also then post the answer with the RFP. And we might do multiple rounds of that.
Okay, so is there usually a deadline to get a question in for such a treatment?
Yes.
And in some circumstances, maybe not this one, but in some, I'm just trying to understand our process a little bit better. Do we sometimes have sessions where multiple vendors can come and ask questions depending on the type of RFP it is?
Yeah, we've done that where we've had folks come in. I don't know that we would do that for this one.
Right. I'm just curious. Thanks.
Yeah.
We've done that with our social service grant process locally.
Anything else for this discussion item? I'm wondering if people thought maybe in the next week would be an okay amount of time to compile your thoughts, and then we send it on to staff after, just because it sounds like there are some people who do plan on adding some stuff. Does a week sound okay to everyone?
I actually need more than a week, I think, just so I can.
Gonna say it's Thanksgiving, so.
Yeah. You're asking for, I would at the very least would say the next COW meeting.
That will be like December 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then we probably need to continue this discussion item at the next committee of the whole, December 6th. If we wanted to talk about it again then. Yep, Chandra?
I was going to say, do we need it to have it as a discussion item or just say, everyone submit their edits and changes by, the 30th or the 6th or whatever, and then, it just moves on. I don't know. Does it have to come back for us to discuss? Since we're discussing it right now, everyone seems to be complimentary to the broad idea of it, and we just flush out the things through email. Is that possible?
I think that sounds reasonable. It looks like the mayor was shaking her head. No, we don't have to talk about it again. I was just thinking about Open Meetings Act stuff so that people can see the final product of everyone else's edits. But I don't know if we're bound to that since this isn't a voting item and how
Well,
that.
if you submit your comments to your lead, which is Chandra, then she can get the scope of work put together, fleshed out, send it round for one last look by you all before we proceed to drafting the RFP. But it sounds like you're pretty much in agreement on the direction you want to go. So there really isn't much to talk about before then, before the final scope is done.
Okay. Any objections to not discussing and doing it over email then? James?
No, I mean the posting of the RFP is going to be public, so
Right.
the end result is going to be shared with everyone openly. So I don't have a desire or need to discuss it again.
Okay. Any last comments for this discussion item? Okay. Oh, Jaya, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to both Grace and Chandra for putting this work to get this moving. I know staff have been taking on a lot, and I appreciate council members taking some of this on to move things forward.
Chris, go ahead.
Same thing. I just want to thank everybody for doing this. Thanks.
Okay, then our next discussion item is procedures related to action items by council continued from October 18th by council members Bishop and Colasetti. So you guys can have the floor however you'd like to do that.
I can say I don't know that I have a ton to add from, we were running a little on that time, excuse me, that last meeting. But just to kind of reiterate that the intent with this is to outline some specifics of, I think, instances of misunderstanding in the hope that it will provide an opportunity for clearer communication going forward. The way things have been done or interpreted in the past, I think, might not always be clear or resonate with those of us who are new. And so being able to be clear and saying, at least for myself, I would like information, when I'm making decisions, and that we don't necessarily know how things have always been done. And so making sure there's that clear communication as we're making decisions so that we all are on the same page and don't end up with confusion based on whether something is in a binding or non-binding part of an ordinance and things like that.
Did Chandra or anyone else have something to add?
I was just going to say, I don't think I really had anything to add from that discussion. I think Jaya summed it up pretty well. I think we just all need to make sure that we're communicating a little better and having more conversation before a decision is final.
Yes, Mary, go ahead.
I appreciate everyone's comments, and yes, this is a transitional period for all of us, and I think we've accomplished a great deal in the past 6 months, and we all have a great deal to learn about working with each other, and I look forward to being back into in-person meetings, which I think would help a great deal as well. But we will absolutely be committed and are committed to communication and providing information. So we look forward to tackling the huge list of items that is on our plate the next 6 months or so. So it's going to take very clear and intentional communication on everyone's part to get where we need to be. So thank you.
Is that a finger, Chris? Go ahead.
Thanks. I want to say, first thing, since I've joined council, I've been very impressed and pleased with a lot of what staff and the executives and the executive staff and administration have done. There is no way I could go on council and put together a 200-page budget. There is no way I could handle all the routine resolutions and ordinances that we go through every week. And I appreciate staff, the work that's done for us to get that stuff, approved and dealt with. But there have been, like those 6 items that I mentioned last time, that were kind of shocking that we weren't included. And I really did misunderstand the co-responder, model, the plan. I really was believing that it was a 9/11 response team, and I didn't know that it wasn't up for our approval. So so stuff like that. I just hope we can improve. I think we, like I said, I really appreciate so much, like the majority of the work that the administration and the staff do. And so I just hope nobody hears, us or the Jaya's memo as any kind of, crazy, whatever, complaint or anything. But we're just trying to improve. And I think working together, we can do that. Thanks.
Jaya, go ahead.
I do want to clarify too that while I compiled notes, that I talked to as many council members as I could when compiling those notes, and that there are contributions directly from four council members on there. So yes, all part of the transparency and communication. And a lot of this is everyone getting situated to changes, right? That it's a change for the staff to have 5 of us who are new as well. So
thank you. And I was going to add that, I agree with helping with staff. And I guess that's kind of my intention, is that it's an interesting role being on council and that kind of balancing act of being on the outside of the city operations. And also, like I think I said before, I've really seen the value in that and the balance of having the day-to-day information and details, and then also not having that and having, really just plugged into the community side. So I think that that's a really important way that our government's set up. And, my intentions are to help with whatever I can to get stuff done that, we'd like to see or that would benefit the people of Urbana, and to make informed decisions about the things that we're asked to make decisions about. So I would also like some more information clarified maybe sometime later in writing with, the citations for how it's set up about the roles of council and administrative branch. And, we got a letter from Dave about council not being able to initiate budget amendments or direct staff. And I'm interested in some more citation so that we can, get a conclusive answer on how to participate best and how we can support in our roles as council to work with staff towards what we see as goals that are benefiting the city, meaning ultimately the people of Urbana, not just the city operations itself. And Mayor, go ahead.
One last comment. General rule of thumb, it always is, we welcome if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you don't understand how something is working, if you want to get more information, feel free to call. I would say start with me or Carol Mitten, and we can get you to the person you need to talk to. But it's always best to to call first and just find out what the deal is, and we'll be happy to help as much as we possibly can. So,
Jaya, go ahead.
I would just ask for the same courtesy, right? As we are thinking about these different aspects of, I know I've had some great conversations with you, Mayor, and your staff. I appreciate how available folks have made themselves. But I think, again, going back to that fact that different folks are going to do things differently. If there are questions about what was intended or what is the direction that we were hoping for, I just appreciate that same call, and do appreciate that I get those calls as well.
Absolutely.
Any other comments on this discussion item? Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
So I'm just refreshing my memory about Dave's memo, and part of which he mentioned directing the staff. I think it would sort of help if we could clarify, I guess, how we direct the staff. Like, I know he talked a lot about what our role as council is, but is it not our, for instance, in this scope of work, we're assisting to direct the staff in that way is, it seems sort of contradictory as to what he said, that we only get to direct the staff, in certain ways, or don't get to direct the staff. So I'd like a little bit of clarification on that.
Certainly, and appreciate the question and desire for some clarification. Again, appreciate the conversation that's ensued so far in terms of coordination and collaboration. I guess what I'll use is that budget amendment with the preamble language, I think that kind of precipitated, I think, a lot of this discussion. And in that preamble was ideas is that no staff could be assigned in a particular way and no resources, monetary or otherwise, could be assigned in a particular way. And so what transitioned from that was to try and have that in the main body of an ordinance as an absolute legislative direction to the mayor and staff. That kind of attempt to direct staff directly in terms of you cannot assign staff this way is beyond kind of the authority of the council. Now, stepping back into the current discussion about the idea of the public safety review and those kinds of things, I think it's okay for council to provide some suggestions to the mayor and the administration on the idea of what they'd like to see going forward in terms of overall operation of the city and their departments. But I think a more directed attempt at a legislative mandate, I guess, on the idea of is whether you can or cannot assign staff in a particular way is really kind of outside the scope of the council. So I don't know if that answers your question or if you'd like a little bit more clarification on that. I know Councilmember Wilkin was interested in trying to get a memo with more citations, I think, and maybe a more fully developed kind of memo, and I'll let the mayor kind of provide that direction. And if that would be beneficial for the council as a whole to kind of see that. I don't know the extent of what IML did in the training session that occurred not too long after your election in this kind of area. And I'd hate to duplicate those things. Maybe if you've got some information from them that kind of touches on this topic, but certainly open to try and assist in the understanding of the difference between legislative and operational based executive decisions.
I think any further clarification and, a more detailed memo with citations would be helpful, regardless of what IML may have gone through, just for reiteration purposes, and even to see if we did get that information from IML. So a more detailed memo, would be helpful to clearly outline and sort of give evidence as to what we can and cannot do. So that would be appreciated. And so is this a direction of staff, or, if we're asking for this detailed memo, is that, I want to make sure we're like in my little box.
I understand. Again, I don't want to make it seem or come across like that you guys are inside a little box that only can do a certain thing and everything else happens around you and without you. I don't think anybody has suggested that that's the impression they'll want to leave you with. I'll let obviously the mayor comment further if she feels it necessary to do that. But I think it's when questions are asked, obviously we want to provide some direction, some answers to those particular questions. I don't see that as literally directing staff in a way that is similar to kind of what that preamble was designed for, which again was just a council kind of direction to the mayor of what they would like to see in terms of how staff may be aligned. But to try and legislatively mandate then kind of becomes slightly problematic in terms of the day-to-day operations of staff. So again, I think it's more of, I don't want to say that there's a fine line to walk in kind of this area, but I think it's the collaboration and communication is more so the key on the idea of if questions arise about certain things, and we certainly try and provide those answers to you.
Okay, any other comments for this discussion? Yes.
We'll try to see that you get the information that would help in further understanding.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Jaya?
So I'm thinking through this because I realize that, you know, folks who are listening may have seen the memo related to the process for the co-responder model and some concerns that were raised there. And then we're referring to this other memo, which Dave provided in response to, you know, when we were told as a council that the way the language about allocation of resources was included in the budget was included in a non-binding section. I think that, and Grace, I don't mean to speak for you, correct me if I'm wrong, that your intent was to clarify, not to go back, but to say, all right, within that, we also said we were allocating these funds for an evaluation of needs. And if we've been told that one part of that was non-binding, we want to clarify that this other part should be. So I think that there are kind of a number of different pieces within this larger question of intent and how things were organized that are getting a little bit muddied. And so I think we're finding new creative ways of clarifying, yes, we want to move forward with the evaluation. That's where we're seeing the scope of work and then the RFP. But I think that there's still kind of, to me, and again, maybe I'm making assumptions, and Grace, please correct me if I'm wrong, but of trying to provide clarification about what the goals were with that particular part related to council. And I feel like there might be kind of a misinterpretation of intent once again. So I think in a way this like reiterates the need for these exact kinds of conversation of how do we clarify what the goals are, what we're suggesting should happen within the limitations of what our different roles are. And I don't know, Grace, if that makes sense for what your intent was with trying to clarify that language.
Yes, I think that you explained that background well. Thanks for taking a step back to make a little sense. It does get muddied, as you said. And yes, I think that, you know, I have a draft of something, you know, I called budget amendment, I think really more of a resolution. I think we need better answers on direction of staff or of the administrative branch. But just to be sure that since we allocated this money, and at that point, there hadn't been moves on the RFP. So I'm glad that we could communicate and get the ball rolling on that more. But like you said, making sure that if it was considered non-binding and is being interpreted in a certain way, that clarifying, you know, at least the way I saw it when we originally passed this in the budget ordinance, that I intended for it to be binding and meaningful, and I intended for those things to happen that were written in there. And then to find out that it maybe wasn't written as such and wasn't interpreted as such, just made me want to try and clarify that if that was the root of the problem. And any last comments on this discussion piece? Yes.
Can I offer something that might help? I think where the disconnect happened is there were two things that you were trying to capture in that language that you had put in the budget ordinance in the whereases. And so one piece was that you were trying to have indicate some direction for staff around the co-responder model. And that's for staff that was budgeted and that was actually, you know, staff that we have in place. So that's one thing, and the money for the staff and the actual people, they're already, you know, you approved a budget for that. The other money, the $196,000 or whatever, is money that's sort of just sitting in a spot, and it hasn't been assigned to any particular purpose other than to advance the conversation around reimagining public safety, and you'll make allocations accordingly. So it's kind of sitting off to the side, and it hasn't been tasked out yet. So there's a distinction, and I think Dave, was trying to explain that in his memo, which is once you've approved a budget and those dollars are assigned in various buckets, they're in personnel buckets, they're by department and so on, then it's the mayor's purview to direct how all that happens. when it hasn't been, and it's just sitting, off to the side, where we would bring a budget amendment to you because it's like, okay, now it's time to approve X number of thousands of dollars to hire the consultant to do the work of the reimagining, the public engagement around reimagining public safety. That's when you actually do a budget amendment and say, okay, now we're going to assign that particular money. But when you approve the budget, then the responsibility for implementation of that shifts to the mayor. So I don't know if that helps, but that's why those two things are kind of different.
Okay, Chandra?
And this might be a question for Dave. So if the city council is a corporate body and the city of Urbana is a home rule city, which sort of allows us or the city to do anything that's not expressly limited by the state legislature, why can't we legislate what staff can't do during the budget, like appropriation process, if state law doesn't prohibit us to?
No, I think that question is a little bit off topic on the idea of the ability for the council to act in certain capacities. The idea of being a home rule entity does provide a lot more power and authority in general because of the nature of the entity itself. But what that doesn't translate into is giving the council, the legislative body, more authority that a legislative body actually has. And so I think that's where that, again, to come back to, I don't necessarily think there needs to be a fine line here, but where that line is drawn is just that idea is that, there may be ordinances and resolutions this city is able to pass because it is home rule, where a non-home rule would not be able to do that. But that, again, doesn't translate into a home rule council has the ability to take action that is not really within a legislative body's purview.
Jaya?
So again, the spirit of this is moving forward. So in some ways, I don't want to dwell too much in terms of the past, but I do think it's important when we're talking about the intent, again, behind that budget amendment, or addition to the language in the budget ordinance, that when I drafted some language to include in the budget, I was not told that I didn't choose to put it in the preamble, right? I did not choose to put it in the whereas clauses. That was a decision that was made outside of my trying to provide some guidance in terms of language. So again, when we're talking about, well, that stuff is, it's already done and it's out of your control. We should have been told at that time, if you include this in this way, it is non-binding. That's kind of the crux of the issue. If there needs to be clear communication in terms of impact, that is not assuming intent. So I think it's important to clarify that. Related to the responsibilities of any given person, the reason why that was written the way that it was so that we could make informed decisions about any models that were being implemented. I'm not going to, go back in and say, well, we need to rehash that. By all means, I hope this is a successful model. The goal was to make it part of a larger strategic effort to addressing safety in our community. That is not how that happened. But I think, again, now we have clarity in terms of what the impact is if they're put in certain places within an ordinance, but would hope that if council members are saying, we want to help, here's a draft, that we are communicated with clearly of, okay, but we're going to put it here and that makes it non-binding, right? That decision can look really different, up to including whether a budget is passed if it's put in a way that is binding or non-binding. So again, that's where this issue of clear understanding communication and not assuming intent is very, very important.
Okay. Any other comments for this discussion? Okay, seeing none, we can close that part of discussions. Thank you all for your input on those discussions. And now we have public input and presentations. And I guess we didn't specify where the presentation, but we typically do that first. So let's do the presentation first. If we have, was it Brian Hopper, I believe? Could we have Brian as a panelist to be able to speak? And then the public will be after that if people want to get their hands ready. Thank you, Brian. You have the floor for a 10-minute presentation. Thanks for being with us.
My volume okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, honorable council members. My name is Brian Hofer. I'm the executive director of Secure Justice, which is a nonprofit located in the San Francisco Bay Area. We work across the country with municipalities as they struggle to keep up with the rapid pace of technology, both as a law enforcement and smart city applications. I also chair the City of Oakland's Privacy Commission, which was created in 2016 as the first of its kind civilian oversight body in the country, where residents with subject matter expertise have a hand in crafting the rules to help us distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate uses according to community norms. I've consulted with dozens of cities and counties across the state, presently working with San Diego, Portland, Oregon, and I was recently appointed to the LA Police Commission's Technology Working Group. I've authored or co-authored 35 ordinances that have been enacted into law, co-authored a handful of state statutes, and written more than 60 use policies for different technologies. I regularly advise law enforcement, administrative staff, elected officials, and community organizations as they consider proposals like the one before you tonight. And I want to first state that I appreciate the job that you have before you. No one should fear violence in their communities. Policing services are a large part of a city council's focus as they allocate resources in response to need. I also respect and acknowledge the concerns of folks in neighborhoods that feel underserved by the police. I'm hearing these exact same things right now in Oakland as we face an increase in gun violence. There are both public safety and political consequences to taking no action. The flip side is also true. Taking action based on emotion could lead to unintended consequences and outright failures. I want to highlight some key findings specific as to license plate readers, which I'll just abbreviate as ALPR. As a subject matter expert on this topic, I can assure you that ALPR has no deterrent effect on crime. Even with fixed cameras and signage, analysis has shown no deterrent effect as to shootings, stolen vehicles, or any other violent crime category. ALPR has historically had a 10% inaccuracy scan rate. This could lead to increased legal liability as inaccurate scans lead to police-resident interactions that may involve guns. San Francisco paid $500,000 to Denise Green, a middle-aged woman that was pulled out of her car at gunpoint by 7 officers. Her plate scan was off by 1 digit. The New York Times reported on the lawsuit filed by my brother and I after sheriff's deputies pulled us out of our car at gunpoint, illegally searched our vehicle in person and threw my brother on the ground, while never checking our ID or talking to us until after the fact. And in my case, the scanner actually worked perfectly. The problem was that the plate never should have been on the hot list that generated the alert. Data hygiene, because ALPR works by mass surveillance and collects data on everyone that drives, is a massive problem. Dozens of people reached out to me after my story went public with very similar fact patterns, and most involved guns being pulled on them. Your policy attempts to address this concern, but it's not sufficient. The same policy existed in my case. The officer calls dispatch to verify the plate number, but all the dispatcher can do is essentially read the same number back to you. They don't have any control over the hot list generally, as most are federal or state, and there's very little to no information as to why it might be present. That's not a fail-safe. As used today, ALPR is true mass surveillance, collecting data on people unsuspected of wrongdoing as they move about their lives. Although proponents claim we have no expectation of privacy on a public road, this is grossly misleading. The US Supreme Court in Jones, Riley, and Carpenter have endorsed what we call the mosaic theory, that a single data point by itself might not be very revealing, but as we gather and retain additional data, and with today's commingled databases, a mosaic of one's life is created, giving us the ability to see associations that we might want to keep confidential. Geolocation data is the second most intrusive to our privacy after biometrics. It only takes 3 such data points to identify individuals, as we are creatures of habit when we drive. We park at our house each night, we drive to work the same way, go to the same grocery store or gym. It's very easy to identify who you are, especially with all the databases police already have access to, plus the largely unregulated private data broker industry, in addition to Google and other open sources. At the click of a button, Lexis and Thomson Reuters can provide any missing information the police might not already access. It's not just the policing aspect, but a true privacy interest. What if I have not come out to my family as gay, but my car is being tagged outside a gay bar? Or perhaps, like many, I choose to fight my battle with cancer in private, but my plate is being recorded outside a cancer clinic each month as I seek chemotherapy treatment. The saying that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear is inappropriate. I have things I choose not to reveal to everyone, and there is nothing wrong with that choice. By taking away my ability to remain anonymous in public, keeping in mind all the many traffic cameras, cell phone tracking, GPS trackers, facial recognition, and so forth, we cannot look at these things in isolation. You're taking away my right to privacy and my ability to not reveal everything about my life to strangers. Courts have said for decades that we have the right to be anonymous in public, but in practice, technology is making this impossible. We are told that we must balance privacy interests against public safety, and I want to make clear, it is not a binary choice. You can have both privacy protections with sufficient guardrails in place and still use technology to achieve public safety goals. However, when compared against the standard used in the Bay Area in 22 jurisdictions across the country with technology frameworks inspired by an ACLU model, ALPR is probably the most lopsided failure because the privacy invading geolocation data is far more significant than the statistically invisible success rate. Historically, for more than 10 years, all across the country, 99.99% of all plate scans will never be used for legitimate law enforcement investigative needs. At best, you're paying for storage you don't need. At worst, the accumulation of data on innocent folks can lead to racial profiling, domestic violence stalkers, and data errors that led to lawsuits like mine. In exchange, you get a 0.01% hit rate, which is not a public safety success itself. It's merely an alert that some scan matches information in a database. I really wish this vote had occurred a week later. It's unfortunate timing, but next week we are jointly publishing a PhD peer-reviewed white paper. It examined the Bay Area's super user jurisdiction of ALPR. They routinely collect millions of plate scans. And to their credit, they've reported annually on their use for 9 years. So we had a good data set to examine. After running statistical regression analytics on the reported data, here are the key findings. And as resource allocators for the city, I hope you give them some weight. So based on this jurisdiction's reported data, the number of plate hits does not predict investigative leads. The positive correlation between license plate hits and investigative leads is weak. The positive correlation of plate hits and stolen vehicle recoveries is weak. In simple layperson speak, this means that expanding the number of readers will not cause an increase in leads or arrests or stolen vehicle recovery. The key takeaway finding, random chance is as much a factor in the reported successes as the use of ALPR itself. It's a coin flip. So this emphasizes why we must move away from emotion-based decision-making and instead make data-driven decisions. I can share with you a silly correlation to highlight why anecdotal stories shouldn't be relied upon. In June 2019, the city of Richmond here in the Bay Area terminated their ALPR contract, and they have not used ALPR since. Their own subsequent crime reports demonstrate that both violent crimes and property crimes have dropped each year since they quit using ALPR, while a large part of the Bay Area shows the opposite. Am I suggesting that ALPR causes crime? Of course not. But that is why correlated data points like this and a few success cases cannot sustain a finding that ALPR is useful in fighting violent crime because statistically it's invisible. It's a zero. And I highlight this failure because I am acknowledging the needs and concerns of the people suffering from violent acts committed against them. We're selling false hope to people that ALPR might cure this problem. Yes, the individual success case here and there will certainly matter greatly to that individual, and I'm not disregarding that, but we can't make government policy based on edge cases, on these outliers. It's been reported nationally by the New York Times that police spend approximately 4% of their capacity responding to violent crime, which raises the question, shouldn't we reallocate the other 96%, at least to temporarily respond to a rise in crime? Oakland is one of ShotSpotter's oldest customers. It detects gunshots. We have ALPR, GPS trackers, cell phone trackers, drones, and so on. It's done nothing to curb a spike in gun violence. I don't have sufficient time here to describe the vetting framework that I would encourage you to pursue. I'm happy to pursue that offline. But in a nutshell, you should do a cost benefit analysis up front first before voting to proceed, because more information might lead to a different conclusion. At present, you're considering releasing this into the wild without a true understanding of its impact or effectiveness. And I've been informed that you've held community outreach meetings, which is wonderful. I applaud that and encourage more of it. But I also see a boilerplate Lexipol policy, which means that the community had zero input into the rulemaking for this technology. The community must have a say in whether you use this tech, and if so, what specific uses are authorized, as some might be too intrusive, if data is to be retained, for how long, third-party access rules, and so forth. And I appreciate that Flock is better than others with their default 30-day retention limit that somewhat mitigates the concerns that I mentioned earlier, but it's still endorsing mass surveillance. You will still be paying for storage you don't need, and it won't increase your success rate. You also have no way to track efficacy, no mandatory robust annual reporting to help inform the public as to whether this was an effective expenditure of your scarce taxpayer dollars. So again, I do acknowledge the difficult job you have dealing with these very real concerns. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you tonight. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Brian. And if you don't mind sticking around a minute, we could take one or two burning questions. Mary Alice?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. It's my understanding that a lot of the Bay Area cities are using ALPR to go into a terrorism database. Is that correct? I've seen a lot of information about how they're interconnected to reduce terror.
I would, off the top of my head, say that about 50% of the Bay Area feeds their data to NCRIC, Northern California Intelligence Regional Center, which is a counterterrorism fusion center, about half the Bay.
And roughly speaking, how many cameras do these individual cities have? Are we talking, do they have 10? Do they have 100? Do they have 1,000? How many cameras are we talking about?
All of the above, because you can imagine, we have San Jose, over 1 million people, and then we have some tiny unincorporated cities that also
So,
send their
for
data.
example, San Francisco, do you know, roughly speaking, how many they have?
They have 8 different departments that each have their own license plate readers. They probably have 90 mobile units. And then
So they're attached to the cars.
And then they have a number of fixed at like the airports and the bridges.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else have a burning question for tonight? Yes, Sharice. Oh, sorry, you're muted, Sharice.
Could you tell me, give me a rough idea of what the population of the Oakland, San Francisco area is?
If we said the greater Bay Area, we're about 9 million. San Francisco is about 800,000 people. Oakland is 450,000. San Jose is our big city at, about 1.5 million.
Okay, so you roughly about 9 million, is that what you said?
So what we call like the greater Bay Area, so a little bit below Sacramento to the bottom of Santa Clara County, there's 9 counties. That collectively is about 9 million people.
So that's what, like Alameda, Kern, is Kern in there?
No, Kern's too far south. Contra Costa, Santa Clara County.
San Francisco County.
Marin, San Francisco, yeah. San Mateo.
And you're basically saying that for 9 million people, the ALPR is not very successful, or it doesn't do anything, or what?
We've been very careful not to say it doesn't do anything. There are reported legitimate success cases, some of which I've been able to independently verify myself, but statistically, it's basically a 0. Because you collect millions and millions and millions and millions of plate scans, a 0.01 hit rate is not even a success. That might lead to a lead, an investigative lead or an arrest, but now you're getting into the 0.00000, 1% as far as success. It's meaningless.
Do you have any idea of how many car-to-car shootings or shootings around into people's homes there are in the San Francisco area and the Bay Area?
I do not.
do you have any idea of any of those crimes that may have happened that have gone unsolved or don't even have any kind of investigative anything happening?
Our homicide rate clearance in Oakland is maybe the worst in the country right now. I think we're at 10% or even lower. We have a terrible time at solving crimes. San Francisco, I think, is been a lot higher, maybe 30-40% solving homicide clearance rates. As far as like unsolved gun crimes, it's probably impossible to calculate. There's a lot of ghost guns crimes that are happening out here that are untraceable. So it would be even hard just to even identify those.
Do you have any idea of, because it sounded like you guys use the ALPRs mostly to retrieve or to find stolen vehicles?
No, that was the primary reason they were introduced about 10 years ago. And they're not actually effective at that, which does surprise a lot of people, but it's essentially, again, a zero as far as statistically significant at recovering stolen vehicles. Out here, mostly, well, I should say largely, because there's been no oversight and nobody's telling them they couldn't do it, ALPR spread rapidly. It is used by a lot of people, but they haven't been able to demonstrate efficacy. And now that folks are starting to push back a little bit by demanding a cost-benefit analysis, we're seeing the type of findings that I just mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate your time and presentation. And that will end our presentation, and we'll go on to public comment. And I see a few hands up. If members of the public would like to speak, please raise your hand on Zoom. And first I have Alan Max Axelrod.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, as a warning, my cat has been wanting attention. You may hear him during this public comment. So I wanted to start out by thanking Chris for, I think this is the second time for bringing in a guest to present on the lack of efficacy for ALPRs. I also wanted to thank Chandra and Grace for the safety review, at least starting something in writing regarding equity and racial justice. I think that that is crucially important because we have to consider where these policies are going to be affecting heavily segregated communities to this very day. I also wanted to thank Chris, Jaya, Chandra, and Grace, if I didn't say your name, regarding the discussion for the co-responder model issues. I think that you all have some experience with intentional misinterpretation, and you are being very restrained in making that conclusion. I am not burdened by such a thing. I think that one of the main things that we have seen with a lot of this city has been a lack of trustworthiness. One of the things that comes to mind is providing misinformation to the city of Bloomington regarding utility shutoffs last year. But nonetheless, one of the things that I wanted to point out in the discussion is that there was an emphasis of calls for how the city would prefer for you to communicate with them. That is a way to avoid written correspondence where one's representation of the conversation can be adjusted to one's convenience. So if you are deeply concerned about the accuracy of something, say the misinterpretation of whether or not to have something in the whereas or be it therefore resolved sections of legislation for this city, keep it in writing. There is absolutely no reason that these elected officials should take offense to that. And you also should note that in the Courage Connections material on abuse, one of the things that they also have is demonstrating anger as one of those strategies. So if anybody gets angry that you're putting things in writing for governance, take note of it. The other thing is that I wanted to thank the city. I'm not quite sure who did it. This might actually be me thanking Police Chief Seraphin, which is rare, for the updates to the ALPR policy. At least on paper, it addresses a lot of the concerns that had been brought up. A couple of the concerns that were brought up regard tracking people who log in to retrieve ALPR information. that's good. There were some other things in there that were pretty good as well overall. I wanted to note also that y'all should probably talk to not the management when it comes to the police as well, especially when the city is prescribing co-responder model to them, because I happened to be in a conversation with a police officer after there was a pretty significant shooting this past week. And the one thing that stuck out to me was that the police officer was saying that responding to behavioral health for them seems like a waste of time. There was so much more that they felt that they could be doing to the community. And I'd be very interested to see what additional police officers, not management, had to say about that. Lastly, I also wanted to say that people had been saying that no solutions have been offered when it comes to community violence. That's never been true. But I wanted to again loop back and point out that other alderpersons are working for those solutions, and I wanted to thank them for that. Have a good night.
Thank you for your input. And next we have Linda Turnbull.
Okay, here I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Linda Turnbull. I'm pretty sure that everybody knows me. I'm pretty sure because most of the people that's on that city council, I did help get elected, and some other people in the community also. I'm here in support of the license plate readers because of all the gun violence that's going on in our city. Have anybody on this board been impacted by gun violence? Do they know the feeling of gun violence? Do they know how we need help with gun violence? We need multiple tools to solve gun violence, just not programs. We need other things too, like license plate readers or any other suggestions, just not one thing. We should not be afraid to try new things, because if we've been using programs forever and they've never been doing anything, we need to be able to try something different. And like I said, Brent 2 is using it. Danville, I believe, is using it. Decatur is using it. Why can we not use it? We need it. Hallelujah. Anytime you have to lay on the floor on top of your wife to keep her from getting killed, bullets going around 60 and 80 times, nobody talking, but you've seen it. Hallelujah. At least there's got those license plate readers would have got a license plate of somebody coming out this area around that time that we could have had something, because we're not getting anything and we won't get anything. Programs will take a long time. Hallelujah, anywhere from 2 to 3 years, or even longer than that. Those license plate readers will give us data information right away on some of these people that's doing this. Hallelujah. We expect you guys there that's here for us to make sure we're safe. And if you're not doing that, how can you go to bed at night knowing that you didn't do the things you need to do to save a life? Hallelujah. Because there are a lot of people whose lives are going to be lost behind this. So when you do this, really think about what you're doing, because every moment somebody's life being taken. And if you didn't go that extra mile, hallelujah, that burden is on you. So we expect you as our council members to do the right thing, and not for other people to tell you what to do, but you make that choice for our lives. Hallelujah. Because there are so many lives being lost. Hallelujah. I've had impacted by gun violence. Hallelujah. I had a sister shot. I had a cousin killed. Hallelujah. I have a lot of things going on, and I've been traumatized. Hallelujah. So if you're not being impacted by gun violence, you need to really listen to the people that are impacted by it and do the things to keep them safe. We expect you, we elected you to do this for us. Hallelujah, to keep us safe, keep us out of harm's way. We cannot keep going on with things that's not working. You need to support your mayor. The mayor is the person that helps you, and you guys need to govern yourself together with her. If she believes in that, you should be able to back her up to do the things you need to do to keep us safe. In Jesus' name, I pray and hope that you guys make the right decision. And if you don't, how can you sleep at night knowing that you let a life be lost? In Jesus' name, amen. Good night.
Thank you for the input. And next we have Tracy Chong.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tracy Chong. There are still many unanswered questions regarding concerns about the installation and use of automated license plate readers, ALPRs. But what is most concerning, though, is that I've seen is the dishonest presentation of ALPR information by Mayor Marlin and Urbana Police Department leadership, like Chief Serafin and Deputy Chief Souls. During the presentations given at City Council and town halls, we have seen Mayor Marlin and Chief Serafin present misinformation. They have omitted facts and downplayed the public's concerns about the ALPRs. It seems like their only purpose of presenting information about ALPRs is to give the public what they think will make the public accept ALPRs, even if this means being dishonest and omitting facts. For example, to assuage privacy concerns, Chief Serafin has said multiple times that the city would not need to provide ALPR information through Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests. This is not true, as there is currently no approved statute that accepts ALPR data from FOIA. Chief Serafin also repeatedly assures the public that he has confirmed with City Legal that ALPR system data is exempt. Interestingly, though, Rantoul City Attorney Dave Wessner has released ALPR data through a FOIA request. And it should be noted that Dave Wessner is also legal counsel for Urbana. So why is Chief Serafin presenting false information to City Council and the public? Chief Serafin has also said Urbana will not share ALPR data with other agencies like ICE, again to downplay public concerns. However, in the police policy on ALPRs, it says that ALPR information gathered and retained by Urbana Police Department may be used and shared with prosecutors or others only as permitted by law. Again, some details are omitted. And in this case, even important details such as the contents of the police policy concerning ALPRs. So I think you should find this very concerning. The public has also been asking for actual data, but the company Flock has not provided solid data. UPD has also not provided solid data. I guess other than what Deputy Chief Sills does, what he does best. That is telling the public how much work he has done, how difficult it is, playing phone tag with other police departments the whole day. Basically just to get anecdotal stories and some percentages which he presented that are not very transparent. The issue of gun violence and what we can do as a community is such an important issue. And these are important decisions that our community has to make. So why can't Mayor Marlin and Chief Serafin present honest facts instead of omitting details? Why can't they present honest facts to City Council and the public so that everyone can make well-informed decisions that are based on facts and data and not just based on emotions and selectively provided information? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we have Steve Fay.
Yes, hello, can you hear me? Yes, hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Dear council members, mayor, and city clerk, my name is Steve Fay, an Urbana resident of Ward 7. I would like to thank you for your service and for last week's council members' input and communication. We found that they were very valuable and are looking forward to learning more from you tonight. Over the past 5 weeks, we have heard many voices, but we would like to ask you to acknowledge and focus on the voices of Urbana citizens rather than those of other places. Primarily, your consideration should be with the voices that are right here in our own city. Hundreds of Urbana citizens have come to you to ask you to have both investigative tools such as the ALPRs and as well as the many wonderful programs that of course we need to correct all the many problems we've had over the years with underprivileged communities. We feel that there are many voices in Urbana that have been ignored without much honest consideration for the plight of folks living in the midst of the flying bullets. Some examples of these appeals include on Monday, June 21st, 403 residents in high crime areas signed a petition asking for closed circuit TV system and lighting. On Monday, October 18th, 118 residents across the city signed a petition supporting automatic license plate readers. The many folks who took time to write you letters, as well as the many folks who take time to attend these meetings, you should be sensitive to their input. For the council members who are waiting to hear about the policy, we understand and we thank you. For the council members who are waiting for data, we would like to share that there may not be much. It's often hard to prove a negative when something doesn't happen. It's hard to correlate that to a specific innovation, such as these license plate readers. But this is a new technology. We're still learning more about it. But we certainly need something because right now we have a crisis. We have elected you to be our wise leaders. We count on you to keep our town's residents safe. Please decide with the careful consideration that this deserves. As part of my remarks tonight, I would like to include a comment from social media from Champaign County State's Attorney Julia Reitz. So this is a quote: "If there is a crime, whether it is a shooting or a sexual assault or robbery like this," referring to the Rantoul Motel holdup recently, "and the suspect leaves the car, LPR cameras can tell us who the car belongs to and lead us to the suspect. Their usefulness is not limited to combating gun violence, but given that much of our gun violence is drive-by or drive-off shootings, they can certainly be a useful tool to find the cars and the guns and the shooters. New technology is just that, new. But we do not have time to wait for data that LPRs helped someone else's gun violence issues. Ours are literally killing us." That's the end of this quote from Julia Reitz. So once again, just like to remind you that Urbana relies heavily on the University of Illinois community. Without the University of Illinois, Urbana wouldn't amount to much. I think we all know that and appreciate that. During my time serving as a researcher, administrator, and instructor at the College of Veterinary Medicine, I met so many students and international scholars from all over the globe. These families count on us for the safety and security of their loved ones that come here to be on our campus. So please show us that you understand and that voices, Urbana voices matter. Again, we ask you for both programs and investigative tools such as this ALPR system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Brandy. If you state your full name for the record, please.
Okay, hi.
Oh, we heard you now. You were muted again, Brandy.
There we go. Okay, sorry. My name's Brandy McCoy, Urbana resident. I also would like to express appreciation for the discussion about public safety. I think that's really important and obviously pertains a lot to these issues that we're facing and, you know, coming up with a solution of the ALPRs in response to. So one thing I want to note is that there are communities surrounding us that have decided to implement ALPRs or maybe something similar, maybe not the exact same thing that we're looking at, or maybe it is, but specifically I'm from Decatur, Illinois, that's where I grew up, and I know that those have not been implemented. So like the city has voted to do that, but they haven't been implemented. So I think that using that as you know, a reason to move forward with ours is just following blindly, and I don't think that that's wise. I also want to note that there has been, through the course of this conversation, a lot of rhetoric, both from council and public commentary, about who is and isn't impacted by gun violence in our community. I find that focus counterproductive. I think that gun violence as a whole impacts our community at large, and we should focus. I do respect and understand that people who have been more heavily exposed are going to, have a different perspective. But I think that there's been a lot of seemingly dismissive rhetoric in terms of, public opinion regarding the ALPRs. And specifically, as someone who has had numerous shootings in the last 6 months within 2 blocks of me, I find that that rhetoric to be limited in its scope. So I just wanted to mention that, and then just state once again that policy is not going to improve ALPR statistics, and that I would love to see that cost benefit analysis before we decide to invest $50,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. Next, we have Julie Watkins. And Julie, you look unmuted, but I don't hear anything. Still not hearing anything from you, Julie. We can try and come back. Okay, so let's come back to Julie. I'm sorry, you look unmuted, Julie, but we can't hear anything. So we can come back to you. And how about I'll move on to Eddie Pratt Jr. for now.
Good evening. My name is Eddie Pratt Jr. I am an Urbana resident, specifically Ward 3, even though I tend to not talk about where I live because it isn't really all that much of importance. I'm somebody that grew up amongst gun violence being a regular factor in their everyday life, growing up in Detroit, Michigan in the late 80s, early 90s, till I left to go to a extremely inequitable and racist place like Alabama for another 15 years before I came here in 2014. And so regardless of the fact that I have lost a couple cousins due to gun violence as recently as 2 years ago, regardless of the fact that it got so normalized for me that it got to a point I no longer ducked or did anything as a kid. Despite all of that, I cannot, in good faith, endorse the implementation of these surveillance cameras. Let's be honest about what they are. Sure, you're aiming them at people's license plates, and that's predominantly the data that it will collect at first. But I mean, that's what they are. It's a camera with a lens that might be thwarted by daylight savings time, because if you haven't been, aware as of late, a lot of shootings are happening in the dead of night. So that would point to a more obvious path of crime reduction, which would be infrastructural improvements, lighting. Yeah. Of course, if you decide to, hyper police us anyway, you're going to have to put in lights either way it goes. And if you do see any kind of, improvement, it's likely because of the lights more than the cameras themselves. I mean, we just heard from someone who is more acquainted than any of us. Now, I sat through that town hall meeting. We were talking about this being a deterrent to gun violence, right? But it's on your own very slide that it's not. And so it makes me wonder, what are we really doing here? In the midst of a vote to our county jail for the tune of 20 some odd $1 million, are we not preparing to mass incarcerate people? Is that not what we're doing in Champaign County right now? I mean, hey, I'm just calling it like I see it. If this is not what that is, then somebody please say something, because this looks exactly like that. Of course, it's going to do more than catch people who are involved in guns. As a matter of fact, it's going to more than likely, more often than not, punish the poor working class of Champaign County simply for existing in this metropole. So you're going to have somewhere to send these people. So then it does make sense to put millions of dollars into a jail. But hey, this is just what it looks like. I don't support these cameras because, I mean, honestly, it's inherently racist. Good night.
Thank you for your comments. We can try Julie Watkins again.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you.
Okay. The public input for last week, November 8th, had several comments from city workers about their contract. I am in solidarity and want them to have a fair wage. I don't think Urbana should be having another contract controversy. And the current Urbana police contract is controversy. I want to note that I don't believe any local member of Urbana FOP has answered my previous invitation in September public input that someone explain about their contract. I invited someone in Urbana FOP, or more than one, to explain why they insist on a side letter to their contract that Francis Rigberg and many others say is discrimination. Of course, it's a while before the next FOP contract is negotiated, but not that long. And the opinions about discrimination are still there. I think many people are still frustrated about what was forced in the contract with FOP. I know I'm still frustrated. And I'm hoping from an explanation from FOP about why they have those demands about the Urbana CPRB. The negotiators' explanation of why it was a bona fide occupational requirement for that committee and what was not discrimination wasn't a good explanation, as Francis Rigberg explained. Maybe someone from Urbana FOP could explain it better. The city workers last week did a very good job of explaining what they were doing and why it was important for Urbana and why they deserve a fair wage. So I'm still waiting. Anyway, thank you for your consideration.
All right, thank you. Next, we have Audrey Ishii.
Thank you. I'd just like to say I look forward to reading the upcoming research reports that Brian Hofer mentions. He gave us several examples of ALPR technology failures, none of which can really be unexpected with a new technology, but he also gave us concrete policy and security improvements that can be made. So that was much appreciated. On Sunday, a local professor entitled his Sunday column against license plate readers, "Black Folks Don't Drink the Kool-Aid on Gun Violence Response." For 3/4 of his column, he addressed the history of horrific disparities in the US criminal justice system, starting with Nixon and proceeding through the 1990s drug war, including bias, stop and frisk, and 3 strikes laws. He described his understanding of class divides among the local Black community, describing the leaders who are working to give tools to the police that we, the people, would pay for and hopefully be in control of as myopic. What he didn't describe was the toll of deaths of children in this community, nor how to stem the deaths of children and young adults in CU that have increased exponentially from 5 deaths per year over the previous 5 years to 11 in 2020 to 22 so far in 2021. This is an epidemic, and waiting for herd immunity to burn it out is just wrong. He also failed to describe how safe he feels on the UI campus, which is protected by some 2,000 security cameras. After a single shooting at 2nd and Green Street, the UI was quick to emphatically announce that no students nor employees were hurt, but that we do not take these incidents lightly, especially when they occur in such close proximity to our campus, said University Police Chief Alice Carey. It is imperative that we take proactive steps to deter further violence and prevent anyone else from getting hurt, which includes, you guessed it, more security cameras and the installation of ALPRs. If you want to look at a class divide, let's look at why the University of Illinois students and staff deserve a level of protection and freedom from fear that we, the people in our neighborhoods, do not. Let's not make the mistake of making our children and our communities collateral damage in our search for privacy because we're confused between the pervasive presence of corporate surveillance capitalism that is profiting from phony drug wars, mass incarceration, and gender political divides with government tools that can simply identify cars driven on our shared public roads in the commission of violent and dangerous offenses. These crimes disproportionately impact the least well-resourced among us. As Berkeley Councilman Taplin said, as we work to reimagine public safety institutions, we cannot lose sight of the current day material reality. Failure to enforce laws fairly and effectively is in itself a form of disinvestment that hurts marginalized communities. That's why we have government in the first place. If there is no safety, vigilantism and revenge takes over, which is exactly what we are seeing. Let's do what we can to truncate the cycle of retribution so we can move on to creating the peaceful and healthful environment we know we all deserve. Thanks so much for your service.
Thank you. Next, we have Teresa Sweeney.
Hello, can you
Yeah.
hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Hi, this is Teresa Sweeney. I am a community member in Urbana, and I am a mental health professional in the schools in Champaign-Urbana. And down the street from my house, about 20 minutes ago, there were about 25 gunshots in the Vaughter and Silver area. Sorry, I just ran up the stairs. I would like to know what are people's responses to people like me who support families, staff, students in schools who are impacted by gun violence every day. And while you're all safe there over at the county building and your families are safe at home, my neighbors, my family, you know, we were just impacted by gun violence in our community. I agree with the last caller who just spoke and said that this is one more tool. I know that people are supporting other measures that are considered, less intrusive to support our communities. But this is one more tool. We need many tools in order to combat the violence in our community. Likely the person that just shot up the apartments down the road from my house are long gone, and the police will have minimal clues to be able to find them. And we may or may not ever find somebody who is able to point to a witness, or we might not have a witness that's brave enough to come forward when they know that they might be next or their family might be next. And so I understand that the ALPRs are not perfect and they have their limitations, but I think investing in this technology for a year and to be able to look at what it can offer our community and make sure that we can see that, you know, the pitfalls that we can find procedures and policies to make sure that they do not impact the people that are most vulnerable in the community, and be able to use this as one more tool to be able to combat violence. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Ben Theobald.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Ben Theobald. I am a resident of Urbana. I would just like to again thank the City Council for the discussion that we've been having on community and just talk on automatic license plate readers and bringing all of these public speakers on the effectiveness and where they've been used. That I find find issues and on whether or not the effectiveness of ALPRs. I understand, yes, that there has been violence. I heard about what happened last week on the shooting that happened at, I believe, near Bradley Avenue, and what I find, and I understand that there needs to be a response and then there needs to be something done about this. But it always seems that our response is, well, either more police, more, as we saw with the Urbana Public Schools a few years ago, build more money for the satellite jail, which I know that's another issue. And now we're talking about more ALPRs, whether or not they're effective or not. It's just, well, let's try it for a year. Okay, if we approve this, $50,000, and we don't know whether or not they were effective and whether or not these are a crime deterrent, which, as Eddie Pratt Jr., who spoke before, that was mentioned at the town hall, which I attended. So it just seems that we are really reacting to something without, whether or not, just going to throw money at it without ever even knowing whether or not the effectiveness is. And I will say, in terms of other solutions, yes, it's kind of hard to something that I just want to bring up about what the Chicago City Council is doing is that they will be voting on a pilot program, pitching money to giving money, $500 to a monthly payment to 5,000 low-income households. So this is just giving money to people, not means tested, because I think this is something we need to, if we're going to talk about the safety of the community, why not invest in the community, give them opportunities, give these, if these are young kids committing violence, give them an opportunity, because right now we are dealing with a pandemic that has affected everyone. And right now, the Illinois Housing Authority development has unfortunately delayed the application window process. It was supposed to be November 8th, but now it's not going to be until December. And we have people dealing with the housing crisis. We have and of course, every time we see with poverty, it's always linked to violence. So, and as we've seen in St. Louis, in fact, St. Louis, which had these ALPR automatic license plate readers, they actually did away with them because this was from their Patrick McKenna, the Missouri Director of Transportation Director, said his agency determined that there wasn't explicit legal authority to operate them for non-traffic enforcement. And of course, there was legislation in the Illinois House that was done away with, voted down to regulate these ALPRs. So I have yet to see any evidence of ALPRs being effective of deterring against crime and violence. So that's my belief. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input. Next, we have Nico Johnson Fuller.
Hi, I am a student at University of Illinois, and I wanted to speak on the issue of ALPRs as well. agreeing a lot with what Ben, Eddie, and Brandy said. I think that we need to be absolutely clear that there isn't the evidence for ALPRs for deterring crime is not strong enough to warrant throwing money at it in this way when, as Ben said, we have clear evidence that poverty and crime are very heavily linked, and we should, if we're going to be, experimenting or trying out something, I think it should be much better to put that money towards programs like the CPD or the Chicago program that Ben mentioned, which is directly funding families and communities. And I think that generally, the wish to increase surveillance instead of increase the financial security of people and, try to improve their economic conditions is not the right direction in order to solve issues of gun violence and crime more generally. And I think that, it's a worrying trend that has not, that is, it's not a new trend, but that's been going for a while, that investing more in incarceration, whether it be the $20 million to the jail that several people have brought up, or the large budget of the police in general, rather than funding financial, rather than investing in the community. And there are many different ways to do that have been brought up repeatedly, including direct financial contributions or like programs that directly benefit those in the community, rather than trying to surveil them and incarcerate more people. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Sarah Nixon.
This is Sarah Nixon, City Council. I would like to submit a comment about agenda item number 8, the ordinance revising the annual budget concerning a draft ALPR policy. You're being asked to approve the use of Urbana residents' taxes for the installation of geolocation surveillance devices that will spy on these same Urbana residents and their visitors, and which, as your own experts keep repeatedly emphasizing, have no quantifiable track record of ending gun violence, and which, based on Urbana's history, are predictably guaranteed to be misused in racial profiling and in any number of other ways. And you're being pushed to approve automatic license plate readers in the absence of all clarity on policy, regulation, and legal protections, thus putting the license plate cart before the horse. And let's be crystal clear on one of the most fundamental issues here. City leadership has declared over and over at town halls, at city meetings, and in official communications that the demand for ALPRs comes not from them, but from 403 people who signed a petition created by Cherise Hersey and Linda Turnbull. But first of all, Cherise Hersey and Linda Turnbull never told the petition signers about ALPRs at all. The petition demanded closed-circuit TV cameras. So implying that the petition is why we are now talking about collecting license plate data on your constituents' whereabouts is misrepresentation and deeply disturbing to witness such a misinformation campaign. Again, Ms. Hersey and Ms. Turnbull sold their 403 frightened neighbors the idea of demanding cameras by equating the cameras with the promise of ending gun violence, quote unquote. And they put the word urgent in capital letters at the top of the petition, forcing people to believe there wasn't time to think it over. They must act, sign in haste and in panic. The language of the petition that they drafted and went door to door with implied intentionally, misleadingly, that getting the city to install cameras will end gun violence, quote unquote. That's false pretenses, City Council, and you can easily verify this. A copy of the petition is filed in the City Council meeting records. Mayor Marlin, in an email which you sent out this afternoon to the listserv of one neighborhood in Urbana, the West Urbana Neighborhood Association, which you stated you had also already emailed to the Urbana City Council, you wrote, among other things, quote, "People who are bearing the brunt of gun violence deserve to be heard and respected," end quote. But do these same people deserve to be misled and manipulated by the city? Your proposition for license plate readers, which the American Civil Liberties Union describes in plain language as a tool for mass, routine location tracking and surveillance, is exploiting and manipulating your constituents' trauma, exploiting and manipulating the vulnerability and desperation of those currently bearing the brunt of gun violence, while, as per longstanding practice, neglecting to invest in hurting people in traumatized neighborhoods, in grassroots initiatives, leading to a total failure to empower communities to protect themselves. Yet, as the Ubuntu Project and other community organizations keep communicating to you, that's where the solution lies. So, City Council, I urge you to denounce the official propaganda for what it is, denounce the misrepresentations and flat-out deceptions perpetrated on petition signers, and protect Urbana's most vulnerable constituents from this proposed invasion of privacy. And please call on the mayor to invest instead in the people. Let's work together to end gun violence where it starts, by connecting with the roots of the problems. Let's focus on trauma. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone else like to address the City Council at this time? So please raise your hand on Zoom. And seeing no other hands, oh, sorry, we've got a few more coming in. And then also I was going to ask council members if we have time, or extend if you have emails to read, but we've got a few more hands. So next we have D. Young, I believe. If you could state your name for the record, please.
Hi, this is David Young. I'm in Ward 4. We watched Jurassic Park at my house the other night, and things took a bad turn when a disgruntled IT guy took advantage of his unchecked access to the computers that run Jurassic Park. He deactivates all of the safeguards that protect visitors from the dinosaurs. And I hope I don't spoil the movie for anyone when I say that dinosaurs eat some of the visitors. Urbana is considering the use of the license plate readers by Flock Safety. Flock has subscribers nationwide. To meet their investors' expectations, they'll seek many more subscribers. They may get them too, because a powerful network effect favors them. That effect is the ease of Flock Safety subscribers sharing plate reads with other subscribers. This is because there are very few safeguards on the data in the Flock Safety system. Flock system may dominate the plate reader business nationwide. In time, it may become impossible to avoid their plate readers on many journeys. The license plate reads collected by the Flock plate reader are aggregated on Flock's computer systems. Subscribers can affect what plate reads are shared by modifying checkboxes in the software control panel. Naturally, they have to enter a login and password. The Urbana Police Department proposes to control that. That is an important step for the department to take, but it is thin protection for the plate reads. License plate reads, nationally aggregated, can reveal a lot about individual Americans' private habits. We heard from Brian Hoffer about that earlier today. They are a treasure trove for rogue investigators, reactionary regimes, foreign intelligence agencies, and criminals who can use private travel information to manipulate or attack their targets. There isn't any indication on Flock Safety's website, notwithstanding they mention AES 256 encryption, who cares? No indication that their database of plate reads is protected from corrupt IT personnel. See, I told you, well, I didn't tell you, but it's come back to Jurassic Park, from corrupt IT personnel at its own offices, let alone protected from theft by outsiders. I've been designing and building software systems for more than 20 years. I know that it's not necessary to build a system that centralizes control over sensitive information in this way. So it galls me that the city is considering the adoption of a system that's constructed in a way that really defies governance and protects privacy so inadequately. So I urge you to vote against adopting this system, and please do take measures that are necessary to protect us from gun violence. My wife and I hear all of the time shots in Urbana. It's a real change from years ago, but from what we can see now, this is a very dangerous system to adopt, and it has a very negligible effect on gun violence. Thank you for listening. That's all I have.
Thank you for your input. I saw a hand from Reverend Dr. Underwood. Didn't know if you're still interested in speaking and struggling with the hand. Okay, we'll see. If so, Reverend Underwood, please put your hand back up. It looks like it's down now. And we have another one that came up from Hildegard. If you could please state your name for the record.
Hi, actually, my name's Luke. My name is Luke Lee. I'm a resident of Champaign. I don't have anything more to add really than what's been shared tonight. I think folks have really talked about this well. I think I just want to throw my support behind what many people, including Sarah Nixon, have said tonight, who are against ALPRs for the reasons stated. So thank you all, and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you for your comment. And do we have anyone else of the public who would wish to address the council tonight? If so, please raise your hand on Zoom. And I'm seeing no other hands at this time. Give it just another second. And then was going to open it up. Looks like we have about 10 minutes or so left in our hour. Are there any emails that have been requested to be read from the public that council would like to read? So please raise your hand. Yes, Sharice.
Okay, hold on just a minute while I find this. Okay, condensed for public comment. Dear Mayor Marlin and members of the Urbana City Council, please consider the following statement regarding the use of ALPRs from Terry Taplin, City of Berkeley, California, Councilman in District 2, who describes himself as a working class Black man, community organizer, and social democrat. The City of Berkeley is also experiencing a gun violence crisis and recently experienced a shootout in a neighborhood park surrounded by small children. In response, Mr. Taplin shared his thoughts in the Berkeley Side nonprofit news on October 9th, 2021. Quote, as I stood with my constituents in the park a few days later, listening to their stories of cowering in the park and hearing their frustration with the city's safety response in recent years, I wondered, are the needs and perspectives of the neighborhoods I represent being taken seriously? It is hard to answer this question in the affirmative when the response I get to any immediate public safety measures the City Council proposes is that my constituents should simply wait for the world to solve the income inequality. Yet a speeding car or a gun and those hopes and dreams, wait, yeah, a speeding car or a gun and those hopes and dreams in an instant. Imagining a better world is still an important task before us, but we also have to assess possibilities that are feasible today. The City Council's mandate as public servants requires immediate action. We have a commitment not just to ensure a better world for future generations, but also right now. Some criticisms of several council proposals hold that rather than enforcing public safety more effectively with modern technology, we should be focusing instead on root causes of social unrest, systemic racism, poverty, inequality, and disinvestment. While I do also work to address these interrelated social ills in my capacity as a council member, it is pretty clear focusing exclusively on these long-term visions is not adequate. We can and must do all of the above. Protecting the safety of road users by holding drivers responsible for the social contract they sign up for when obtaining a license is hardly an intrusion into civil liberties. It is the bare minimum your public servants should be doing to uphold them. We do not live yet yet live in a world where the rules establishing a peaceful society are imposed entirely by sheer altruism. Unfortunately, we do live in a city where lawless violence with cars and guns as weapons of choice has a disparate impact on Black and Brown communities and disinvested neighborhoods. If you can empathize with the generational trauma in the Black community, it shouldn't be too hard to also empathize with Black people getting their cars stolen or hit or run over in crosswalks. Believe me, we're not fond of those indignities either. In closing, I urge the council to fulfill their elected duties to listen and echo Councilman Taplin's question. Are the needs and perspectives of the neighborhoods I represent being taken seriously? I urge City Council to vote in favor of the proposed budget amendment to lease at least 20 automatic license plate readers for the period of 1 year for all of the reasons described by Councilman Taplin's opinion piece above. Thank you for your service, Julia Guth, Urbana resident, Ward 6.
Thank you. And other emails to read? Mary Alice, did you have a hand up for that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I will do my best to read this as quickly as possible because it's a long one. Dear Mayor Marlin and members of the Urbana City Council, I understand that the Urbana City Council will vote tonight on whether to implement the automated license plate readers in Urbana. So I'm emailing you as a concerned citizen of Urbana Ward 5 in support of the implementation. Please consider my email when making your vote in regards to the ALPRs and the reasons given to support why they are a very important investigative tool to address the exponential increase in gun violence in Urbana. We are watching with growing anxiety as gun violence has been increasing and personal safety decreasing in Urbana and the surrounding area. Our sense of helplessness and worry has also increased due to the reality that repercussions of gun violence can spill over into the schools, which has already occurred in the past years at Urbana High School. All Urbana students should be looking forward to their future and not be exposed to and potentially become involved in gun violence that could derail their futures and put their lives at risk. My kids attend school at Urbana, beginning with kindergarten at Wiley School, where I was a frequent volunteer. As a volunteer, I was aware of many impacts of trauma on students in the community, and I strongly support the expansion of programs for marginalized children and families in our community. I'm especially concerned for those who live in neighborhoods where gun violence has been centralized. Children should not be exposed to this violence. They should not be familiar with the sounds of gunshots, should not be endangered, and live in fear in their own neighborhoods due to the threat of indiscriminate gunfire. They should not see the shooting incidents happen without resolution, and they deserve to be protected. Families in every Urbana neighborhood should feel safe without hearing gunfire at all times of the day. Police show up after shootings occur, find little evidence, leaving the police blotter to list another crime committed by yet another unknown offender. Something needs to be done to intervene before another person is killed or wounded, and before another family has to grieve or face the suffering of an incapacitated family member due to gun injury. Families living with fear and confined in their homes by the threat of violence outside of their doors and too scared to or intimidated to bear witness to it are at risk. At the same time, police need a witness. If they are going to be able to begin an investigation, one that is not put at further risk to provide evidence. This witness that is unbiased and accurate with readily available evidence is the very investigative tool needed to immediately begin to help solve the problem at this moment, the automated license plate readers. I was encouraged when it seemed that Urbana would be adopting these devices, but opposition has been voiced concerning a violation of privacy and where the ALPRs would be placed. But the ALPRs capture only images of the backs of cars, getting the license plate number, color, model, and type of car. Information is publicly available to any person at the same location. The data will belong to the city, not the company, and will be used for intended purposes, evidence to solve these crimes, and won't be sold or transferred for another purpose and then deleted after 30 days. The placement of ALPRs will focus on neighborhoods that are experiencing gun violence and collect images from all vehicles without bias. If an ALPR image ends up solving a gun violence crime, then a retaliation shooting could potentially be prevented. Instead of another intended victim or innocent bystander killed or injured and another offender facing incarceration. I understand the concerns regarding protecting the rights of Blacks and Brown citizens of Urbana that live in these neighborhoods where ALPRs would be placed. I support the activism of those voicing concerns. However, I feel that the use of ALPRs could be an important step to provide needed information to help end the cycle of violence and reduce the number of unknown offenders currently committing crimes. It is obvious that there will be plenty of eyes watching the police for any sign of misuse of this tool. Maybe a committee with the purpose of review of all ALPR data could be formed. I believe the city and citizens of Urbana can do more than one thing. We can aid police investigators with ALPRs, we can provide programs that would help marginalized citizens, and we can work towards ending racial bias and supporting meaningful police reform in our community. There's one more paragraph, but I don't have time. This is signed by Allison Colgrove, an Urbana resident.
Thank you. Are there any other emails to read? We have time for maybe one more. Okay, go ahead. Sharice?
Yeah, I just came across this one. With the escalation of crime and especially shootings in Urbana, the City Council has a responsibility to support all means for reducing crime, including the LPRs. I strongly recommend that you vote in favor of providing the LPRs for 1 year. I support Mayor Marlin and State's Attorney Reed's positions. State's Attorney Reed well states this as follows. Christopher Evans, I appreciate you acknowledging that you were wrong about tasers, but really what you were wrong about is police officers and how they would use tasers, just as you were wrong about how law enforcement here will use LPR cameras. If there is a crime, whether it is a shooting or a sexual assault or a robbery like this, and the suspect leaves in a car, LPR cameras can tell us who the car belongs to and lead it to the suspect. Their usefulness is not limited to combating gun violence, but given that much of our gun violence is drive-by or drive-off shootings, as they certainly would be a useful tool to find the cars and guns and the shooters. New technology is just that, new, but we do not have time to wait for data that LPRs helped someone else's gun violence issues. Ours are literally killing us. Mayor Marlin discusses the impact of crime in areas of our city who suffer the worst effects of gun violence as follows. Finally, I strongly believe that people who are bearing the brunt of gun violence deserve to be heard and respected. Hundreds of residents of Ward 3 and other neighborhoods across the city have signed petitions and sent heartfelt messages to you describing their personal experience and trauma. Elected officials from Ward 3 support the purchase of the ALPRs. The NAACP Champaign County supports purchase of ALPRs. It is time to make a decision on this issue and respect the voices of the people bearing the brunt of the violence. Eileen Cohen, Ward 7, Urbana.
Okay, thank you. Then that concludes our public input for tonight. And next we have staff report. Do we have any staff reports? Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick reminder that the City Council will be doing goal setting sessions on December 2nd and 3rd, and we will be sending out logistics for that toward midweek of this week, once we get all the details worked out.
Okay, thank you. Anything else or questions on that? Okay, none. Next, we have resolution number 2021-11-046R, a resolution estimating the tax levy fiscal year 2021 to 2022 and by HR Finance. Do we have a presentation on this?
Yes, Elizabeth Hannon will be presenting. So you'll need to, I'd ask you to please promote her to a panelist.
Yes, IT, if you could promote.
There she is.
And then Elizabeth, whenever you're ready and unmuted, you have the floor.
Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna share my screen and run through a little presentation for you. So let's make sure that's working. Are you all seeing that screen now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to talk tonight about the property tax levy for 2021. And this is, I know this is the first time most of you have seen a tax levy, at least for the city. I know you saw the township levy last week. So we're going to start with some kind of basics about property tax. First of all, there is the assessment process. I know that Wayne Williams went into that some length last week, but at a very high level, all of our properties are assessed at 1/3 of their fair market value. That's the equalized assessed valuation. Then another piece of the pie is exemptions, which are used to reduce the taxing value. The most common exemption is the $6,000 exemption for owner-occupied properties. There are a number of others that are defined in state law. So the taxing value for a particular piece of property is that equalized assessed value less the exemptions, and that's the basis that's used to calculate the tax bill for a property. So for example, if we're looking at a $150,000 home and the average in Urbana is right around that number, it would be assessed at 1/3 of fair market value or $50,000. If that home is owner occupied, then that exemption reduces the taxing value by $6,000 to $44,000. And then $44,000 is the amount that's used to calculate the property owner's tax bill. So each taxing district, so the city, the school district, the park district, the county, all of the others, levies their own taxes, and we all do that independently. The county then calculates the total tax rate for a particular property by adding the tax rates for all of the individual taxing districts that are applicable to that property. For most properties in Urbana, the city's property taxes are about 13% of the total tax bill. And also important to remember, the taxes that we're going to ask you to levy in 2021 will be received in calendar year 2022, and that will actually overlap 2 separate fiscal years. It will be partly in fiscal 22, partly in fiscal 23. So one of the tricks to this is estimating the taxing value at this point in time when we're beginning the tax levy process, and even when we finish it, when you adopt the levy, the assessments are not finalized. So one thing that we do here in Urbana is when we ask you to approve the final levy, we also ask you to approve a separate ordinance that effectively limits the tax rate. We have maintained a stable tax rate of $1.3499 for quite some time now. So I also want to hit just briefly on pension funding, because you're going to see that this is a very, very big part of our tax levy. So police and fire pensions are defined benefit plans. So all the benefits are set out in state statute. Our current funding policy, which is actually in the city's financial policies, is to be 100% funded over 20 years. And that started with the 2018 tax levy. And that included a ramp up period of 5 years to get to that funding level. So that is in the financial policies that have been approved by previous councils that are also in your budget book. One of the concerns about pension liabilities is that can be a slippery slope. So there was actually a period in the past where the city reduced pension funding, and we saw some pretty significant growth in our unfunded liabilities. And then in 2018 was when we went back to what would be considered in terms of best practices, a more appropriate funding method. Oops, I got these kind of out of order here. So, sorry. So we're going to take a look at the current tax levy, the 2020 tax levy. Those are revenues that we collected in 2021. And as you can see on this pie, schools are the biggest part. It's more than half of the total tax bill. The city is about 13%. We've got parks, the county, Parkland, and a couple of much smaller taxing districts. And my slide went a little wonky there, but of the city's part, The biggest portion of that is for pensions, which is the bright orange part here. This kind of reddish part down here is actually for the library. And this blue part, the smallest part in that bar, is the money that actually goes to the general fund to pay for basic city services. And then I'm also going to show you here kind of what property tax, how property tax impacts the general fund budget. So we've got a number of our significant revenue sources here. This purple portion is the corporate tax levy. It's less than 3% of our total general fund revenues, and that is what pays for basic city services. The bright green piece there is property taxes for pensions, and those are received into the general fund, and then they're paid out to the pension funds directly. So it's just basically a pass-through that all happens generally within a day or two of when we receive the tax revenues. So the actual part that supports city services is that small purple or lavender piece. And then looking at our assessed value trend, I think we've got about 12 years here. And you can see way back here in 2009 and 2010, around the time of the Great Recession and right before the hospital properties were taken off the tax rolls, we were up here at about 600 million in assessed value. And then we saw a drop off. And then it's taken quite a long time to get back to that level, but we just kind of hit that mark in 2020, and we'll see a little bit of additional growth in 2021, we expect, although we don't, it won't be a decrease, but we don't know the exact amount of growth. Also, this little blue part here, some of you might recall that in 2018, some OSF properties that had been removed from the tax rolls were put back on, and then they were removed again. So that little blue part just shows the impact of that. So again, looking at what homeowners might pay just for the city's portion of their property tax bill, I give you a couple of examples here, but again, $150,000 is about the value of an average home in the city of Urbana, and the actual taxes that that resident would pay with the exemption for an owner-occupied home is about $594. So the mayor does recommend maintaining our current $34.99 tax rate. That's actually addressed in our financial policies, where we have a stated goal to attempt to achieve an overall tax rate that's competitive with the city of Champaign, although that's not completely within the city's control. Right now, our city tax rate is slightly higher by about 4 cents versus their tax rate. So we levy taxes for 4 purposes: police pensions, firefighter pensions, library operations, and what's called corporate purposes. And that is the part that we talked about that goes into the general fund to pay for basic city services. That's really the only place we have much flexibility. And again, it's becoming a very small part of the tax levy. The library tax levy the library is very dependent on property tax revenue. It's the vast majority of their revenue. And the proposed levy of $3.7 million for the library is based on the budget that council reviewed during budget review. And it's part of our approved budget. And that provides the revenue that's necessary to support that budget. So that's an increase of about 5.4% from their current tax levy. And then for police and firefighter pensions, they're the next largest share of the levy at about $3.66 million. And again, that's based on the funding policy that's contained in our financial policies. I did provide some additional information. I believe I attached to the memo, that 2018 memo that talked about pension funding policies. So our goal is to be 100% funded over 20 years. This is the 4th year of a 5-year transition period. Actually, this year, because of excellent investment performance, the firefighter pension fund has actually reached that path and they've completed the transition, but police pension has not yet completed the transition to that funding path. The corporate levy pays for general fund services such as public safety and public works. And again, that's the part that we adjust to maintain that stable tax rate. So based on maintaining the same tax rate, that portion is going to actually decrease. It's the only part of the levy that will decrease by somewhere between 230 and 319,000, depending on adjustments to assessments that occur before the levy is extended. We did anticipate a decrease when we did our last financial forecast, and as we work on the next one, we'll continue to project that in. Sorry, my mouse is getting jumpy. So kind of looking at all of those pieces together, you can see this goes back to 2013 and then shows over time the different components of the levy. So you can see here at the bottom in purple, this is the library tax levy. It was pretty steady back here, but been steadily growing for the past few years. The green part is the pensions, and that's police and fire combined. And you can see here the impact of some decisions that were made about pension funding. So back here in between 2013 and 2015, the pension levies decreased down to the minimum required by state law. And that was done to balance the budget, but unfortunately our unfunded liability was growing significantly during that period as well, which led to a concern about in the long term, would we be able to sustain city services. So then you can kind of see that going down, and then it starts to go back up as the unfunded liability increases. And then here we started the transition back to the current funding policy. And then basically the blue part, the corporate levies, is kind of the remainder. It's what's left. And again, that increased as we decreased the pension levies, and now it's decreasing as the pension levies increase. So just in terms of process here, we will ask you next week to approve the estimated tax levy. That's just it's a feature of tax law in Illinois that the first step is adopting the estimated levy to kind of state our intention. And then based on that, we make a calculation that determines whether we need to advertise and hold a public hearing. In this case, we're expecting an increase of less than 5%, so we would not be required to advertise and hold a public hearing. And then the final tax levy would be presented to council for approval on December 13th, and that would be a package of ordinances. Actually, there would be an ordinance levying the taxes. There would be an abatement for the bonds. So I'm going to talk about that just for a second. And I think we've talked about this previously, but when the city issues general obligation debt, there is automatically, as part of that process, that an order goes to the county clerk to levy taxes to pay the debt, because that's the security on the bonds. But if we are going to pay the debt service from another source, which we do for the 2 bond issues that we have outstanding, we pay them from one of the TIF funds and from local motor fuel tax revenues, then we have to annually go back and abate. We have to affirmatively tell the county clerk that, yes, we have the money to pay the debt service from another source, and so you don't need to do that. And then there will be an additional abatement that you will approve that will allow us to maintain that targeted tax rate of $1.3499. And that is, that's important for the city of Urbana, just from the perspective of maintaining competitiveness in terms of development and in terms of encouraging home ownership. So anyhow, that's property taxes in a nutshell. And I know that was really fast, so I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions so far? Jaya, go ahead.
I was hoping you could talk a bit about the decrease to the general operating fund. I feel like it's most weeks we hear about how short-staffed the city is, especially in public works, and concerns about competitiveness. I am concerned about that decrease. So if you could talk to that a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's really a result of trying to maintain a stable tax rate. So as a home rule municipality, we have a lot of options to increase revenues. And so normally what we'll do is we'll prepare the financial forecast, which you can expect to see probably the very first part of January. And then we'll take a look at the financial forecast, and we'll take a look at any identified needs, which will likely come from the council goal setting process that you're also going to engage in soon. And if we identify a gap that we need to address, then we would have a conversation about what are our options for closing the gap. But again, as a home rule municipality, we have virtually unlimited options. But we believe that maintaining a competitive tax rate is important for the city, because without consistent economic development activity, that actually has a negative impact on our tax base, which is a problem in the long term. Does that help?
It does. I'd love to hear what might be on the radar for addressing those gaps, but I do appreciate that response.
Okay. So Chandra and then Mary Alice.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thanks for that information. So I would assume that annual pension cost increases. Does the property tax for those pensions keep up with that increase?
Mm-hmm. So yes, if we have, reasonable growth in our property tax revenues, that should keep up. I mean, that's largely dependent, again, on growth in the assessments for the city as a whole, which is one of the reasons why economic development is important to us. You've seen a lot of growth in these last 3-4 years because of the ramp up to get on that long-term funding path, right? So we wouldn't expect to continue to see that level of growth. It'll level off at some point, just like it's leveling off now for fire pension. It should level off for police pension at some point here in the next couple of years. At some point, though, I mean, and I think this is an important point. Those are obligations that we have to meet, right? And so if we were ever unable to meet them with property tax and personal property replacement tax, which is part of the equation, then we would have to look for another source of revenue to do that.
Okay, Mary Alice?
You hit on exactly what my question was. I was trying to figure out what personal property replacement tax revenue is. Is that?
Okay, I'm going to try and give you the quick version because it's truly convoluted. And so I'm not going to get the dates exactly right, but around 1979, I'm going to say, Illinois eliminated the tax on personal property, right? So there used to be a property tax on personal property, like for example, automobiles annually, not just when you buy your car. And so that tax was eliminated and it was replaced with another tax, which is largely driven by corporate tax revenues. And that is the personal property replacement tax. And there's some very specific requirements in state law that say that whatever percentage of our pension obligations we were meeting with that personal property tax back in 1979, we have to continue to maintain that same commitment from personal property replacement tax going forward. So that is why when you look at the police and fire pension levies, we're taking, it's 8.12% off the top, and we're saying, okay, here's the funding need that we get from our actuarial study. Take off 8.12% because we know that has to come from PPRT, or personal property replacement tax. and the remainder is the tax levy. And it's really, I know it's really convoluted, but that's the story.
It's pretty convoluted. I think, and Jaya asked my other question about the decrease and how we're going to absorb that. So thank you. One final thing, are you going to put the presentation online, or is it already available under the, yeah?
I can, it's not, because I was working on it until late this afternoon. Yeah.
If it could be put on under the meeting information online for people, that would be great.
Thank you. And I have a question, but maybe like it's a few questions in one question. So my understanding, if you could verify this, is that we're setting the estimated tax levy, and then it can be reduced or adjusted to meet the desired rate. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
And can it be increased, or it can only be reduced to that rate?
So it almost never happens, but well, so we know if you're talking about based on that $34.99 tax rate, it wouldn't, we know it won't, it would only be reduced, because we already know what the total assessments are. We just don't really know at this point what's happening with board of review and other adjustments that might happen. So we know we wouldn't need to increase it, right, to maintain that tax rate. It would only need to be decreased, if that makes sense.
Okay, so you feel that this levy kind of encompasses the rate, so it would be expected that it would be reduced to meet the desired rate.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The final assessed value that's used for a levy extension will be lower than the number that we're using for this estimate.
Okay, and could you elaborate a little more about ways to close that gap with the deficit for the general fund for property taxes?
So, and until we complete the financial forecast, I'm not going to say 100% I'm sure that we have a gap. There's a lot of things in play, right? So we're in the middle of a pandemic, but retail sales have been just really performing extremely well. So there's a whole, that process of creating the forecast is what really gives us a fix on that. And we're still in that process. So it's really hard for me to say with certainty that there is a gap. And if there is, what it is. But we have, and I don't want to talk specifics, but I have a list of, some years ago, I went through and I made a list of like all the, what we thought were all the reasonable revenue options that were available to the city. And so if in that process, we identify a gap that we need to address, then we'll go back to that list. We'll see if there might be anything new, but I really don't think so. And then we'll kind of talk through, we would come back with, maybe several options and kind of talk through the pros and cons of each if we decide that we need new revenues.
And so you're saying that's because the property taxes are a small part of the city funding, so sales tax and other things might increase enough to make up that difference?
Right, it's possible. It's possible. It's difficult to forecast sales taxes right now, but we're working really hard to pull all the information together and do our best. And it's not just, property tax is a very small piece of the general fund, that's part of it. But part of what takes so much time in the forecast is that there are so many unique sources of revenue in the general fund, and some of them are fairly large, and it just takes a long time to do all the research and put those projections together.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Okay, Mary Alice?
If there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to make a motion. So I'll move resolution number 2021-11046R, resolution estimating the tax levy for fiscal year 2021-2022 to City Council. What date are we sending this to City Council, Elizabeth?
Next week.
Okay, to City Council with a recommendation for approval.
A second.
Moved by Mary Alice, seconded by Sharice. Did you want that on the regular or consent agenda?
It's tax. We should leave it on the regular.
Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, could we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That motion passes. And next we have ordinance number 2021-09-044, an ordinance revising the FY 2022 annual budget amendment 3 HR finance. Is there any planned further presentation on this tonight?
This is Chief Seraphin. No, I don't think there is. You've already gotten the newest or latest version of the LPR draft policy. So if there are any questions, I can answer those. So.
And Dave Westner is available, would like to address the question that came up about FOIA, about the ALPR data being subject to FOIA.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
All right, thank you. And again, I did want to kind of address something that came up in public comments, because I don't want the council to perhaps be confused or concerned about that comment, because the comment didn't really elaborate on the concept of the release of information. And so as indicated, I was asked by Rantoul to kind of step into dealing with some FOIA requests related to ALPRs. So I'm going to take you kind of through a couple of steps of this. And the reason I want to do that is it is related to a piece of information, a record kind of, that was obtained from Flock when the first request came into the village. And that was before they asked me to kind of step in and help them deal with those particular information requests. So the first request comes in saying, I want information related to LPRs on this particular date at this particular location. So village staff immediately contacts Flock, again, because of the short turnaround time for dealing with FOIA requests. They received information back. It was at that time they asked me to kind of step in and help assist them, because they were getting now multiple requests kind of in short order relative to the information. And so what the information basically were the images and then an Excel spreadsheet. So I want to talk about both of those. First, I'll deal with the images. As we can kind of understand, the nature of this system is really to take a photograph of realistically the backside of a vehicle with regard to the license plate number, because that's their purpose. And so what you have in that image is a portion of the vehicle along with the license plate number itself. As been indicated in previous meetings, I think relative to this in terms of release of information, where information is not subject to FOIA, what I would indicate is a personal license plate number is specifically exempt as personal information under FOIA. And so because the photograph is taken, that is a record that actually exists that must be dealt with regard to FOIA. So when you're talking about the images, what you end up with is basically an image of a portion of a vehicle, and then the license plate number itself is blacked out. So that information is not released along with the image. It literally ends up being merely a portion of the vehicle. So now I'll talk about the Excel spreadsheet. And as a caveat to this, I've had multiple conversations with the Attorney General PAC about the nature of these kinds of requests in conjunction with those that the Village of Rantoul is actually receiving. The biggest conversation was related to this Excel spreadsheet that came back from Flock on the very first request. What I wanted to know from the AG and confirm from them is that a public body is not required to create a record relative to responding to any particular request. And I said, when this occurred, I explained that I did not believe that this Excel spreadsheet is generally held by Flock or maintained or used by Flock on a regular continuous basis in the operation of the system. And I said, I don't think then we have to actually create this Excel spreadsheet every time we get a request. The Attorney General had said that they have, I think, some requests that they're looking at currently, but they have not formed an actual opinion about the nature of some of these requests. There wasn't actually an opinion that they could provide me that may have been helpful in this discussion. But she did kind of confirm and agree with my assessment that the Excel spreadsheet is something that is created or would not be required for the village to actually do every single time a request came in. That being said, because this very first one actually existed and was in fact in the possession of the village at the time, I had to deal with it. And so I was not going to hide it, was not going to try and just suggest because it didn't have to be created, we didn't have to release it, subject to any redactions. And so that probably is perhaps stemming from a comment during public comment about information being released. What I'll share with you about the Excel spreadsheet is this. It had basically 5, I think, or 6 columns in it. First column was the license plate number itself. Other columns were the date, time, location, and really a text designation that an image had been taken by the system. That's it. That's all it had. Did not have registered owner names, did not have registered owner addresses, didn't have a make and model of the vehicle, didn't have a color of the vehicle. It literally was the plate number, time, date, location, and a text designation on the image had been taken. So with that one, again, because personal license plate numbers are exempt, that column was removed. I left the heading in there to indicate to the requester that that was the nature of the information held in that column, but was redacted pursuant to the act. Because I confirmed with Flock that this Excel spreadsheet is not a normal thing that they do, it's not running in the background, it's not continuously populated with information as vehicles run by a particular camera. It actually had to be created based upon the request. So with that, coupled with my conversations with the Attorney General's office, going forward, the only thing released is the portion of the image of the vehicle and the license plate number is actually blacked out. So I just want you to be aware that in the concept of information being released, I think the concern about these systems and what information would be released is still the same position we've always had, which is it's not. There are exemptions that cover a lot of information relative to these particular systems. I do also believe that because of the nature of the information, this is why the state legislature had legislation pending that would actually statutorily exempt any and all information kept or maintained by these systems in itself. So again, that's kind of the indication as a qualifier to that public comment. You can certainly answer any questions then related to that.
Thank you. I saw James hand up first and then Chris.
Yeah, so if I could clarify something, the image of the car that was released with the license plate blacked out, how was that image identified as something that was requested by the person submitting the FOIA?
What the FOIA request was for any images and any data related to a particular camera at a particular location.
So it had no, the requester didn't have any identifying features of the car to make the request. They were just this date and time,
right?
This camera.
Yes, very general request.
This period of time. And so there was no connection either by the request to what that car might be or whose car that might be. And so okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Chris?
Yeah, Dave, I don't know if you would remember this, but are you aware if when you released the spreadsheet, did it record, before you redacted it, did the license plate cameras record license plates at nighttime?
The images were of a couple of different time periods. And again, there's been multiple requests. So I will tell you is that I can't recall specifically this very first request was both for daytime and nighttime. the Excel spreadsheet lists the time and date of them. I can't recall whether they were at nighttime or not, but subsequent requests were for various times, some of which were at nighttime. And so again, those images are dealt with in the same fashion as daytime. Any images that are going to be the portion of the vehicle with the license plate redacted.
But you don't remember, well, I know that, but I mean, I'm just asking, do you remember that the license plates were recorded at night, but you just don't remember?
I guess I'm not sure I understand the question, I guess. I mean, if a vehicle is driving by one of these cameras at nighttime, it will take the photograph.
But will it record the license plate?
Well, I'd have to go back and look. I think I now understand the nature of your question. I'd have to go back and look on that. I think what you're asking probably is the ability of the camera to capture the plate itself at nighttime, does that exist, right? If it's dark, let's say it's midnight, the question really relates to the idea is the license plate actually going to register within the system because now it's so dark at night? Is it possible to do that? I'd have to go back and look at the time for the request and look at maybe the images too. So.
Okay, thank you.
If I may real fast, Dave. So it's my understanding that yes, it uses infrared and it does collect license plate numbers after dark.
Okay, Jaya?
It's kind of a strange question, but I think just for clarity, Dave, because you've got these two roles. You've got your role with the Village of Rantoul and you've got the role with the City of Urbana. And, you know, certainly the information you're talking about is relevant to both, but I'm a little, if you can clarify what role you're speaking in, because I think there could be there's kind of an odd overlap of you're talking about information from what I can hear related to your role with Rantoul to inform a decision for the City of Urbana. So just would like it if you could kind of clarify what role you're speaking in tonight.
Right. As I'm an attorney, outside attorney that assists the Village of Rantoul in their operations as well, I guess, if you will. So I'm not the designated FOIA officer for the Village of Rantoul, but their staff persons asked me to kind of step in to help them deal with these particular requests.
Okay, Chandra?
I think I had an internet glitch, but you mentioned some pending legislation. Could you expound more on that and like if there was a bill number?
You know, and I apologize. I should have wrote that down. What I've understood, and maybe Chief knows off the top of his head too, because I think he's monitoring that, is there was legislation that was proposed that basically would amend the Freedom of Information Act. What the Freedom of Information Act allows for is if there are specific statutory requirements that information is not to be released, then it kind of qualifies as its own exemption, if you will. And there was pending legislation that dealt with ALPRs that would indicate that any and all information relative to the system, the operation of the system would be exempt under FOIA. I don't know where that stands currently. You would have to look that up and provide that to you.
Okay, Mary Alice?
So Brian, I think I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds here. So I just want to kind of talk about visually confirming the motor vehicle's license plate numbers. I'm going to go down a process here. So there is a license plate or a partial license plate that has been indicated in a potential crime, and the authorized users would input it into the system. Is that correct?
It's to make an entry for further location.
So it would.
We're
So they
going
would take.
to need a full plate. Is what.
Okay,
what
so
they'll
full
need.
plate
if
is
we're gonna have this car
then
involved in
entered
this-
into the system.
Okay.
Okay, full plate is entered into the system. There's a hit. Police officer A sees the hit, and so they stop the car. And then do they call somebody, or do they see something in the system that allows them to verify it? I'm trying to understand the verification process.
So let's do this. Let's say Rantoul enters a plate in regards to a shooting event, and it drives through an LPR, and we get an alert in Urbana, Illinois. And the officers would then say, we got an alert, license plate ABC 123 on a black pickup. The officers want to make sure then that what they're seeing on the screen actually matches the metal, the steel rectangle on the car. Is it ABC 123 or is it ABC 125? And oops, that's a mistake. The other thing we want them to do is look at then is it whatever they do have, does it generally match? As you heard a couple of weeks ago, the plate matched, but that's because somebody had swapped license plates between a car. So in my example, I think I said black pickup. Is it a black pickup? Then with leads and NCI, we would run the plate through leads, confirm, is this still active? Is this still an active event? Because that's what's populating the hot list that we got the hit off of. If it's a local hot list, you'll see, I think in our policy, we have it set so that it would be, I think it has to be checked at the beginning of each shift, that's accurate. So that one, they can't really check because it's already been hopefully checked at the beginning of the shift. They'd run it through leads. Yep, lead says indeed this is a stolen car or whatever that. So it depends on which version you're using, I guess. And then they would be able to determine what action they would take. And it sort of depends on the I guess the type of crime and the event. Does that help a little bit?
It does help. And just as a side note, I was driving down 57 yesterday. There was alert on 57 for a silver Blazer with this license plate for a missing person. I saw it 5 times coming driving down. So it's exactly, my assumption is it would be a similar system because it gave us the color, what it was, and the license plate to be on the lookout for. So thank you.
My guess is, Mary Alice, that was probably some kind of alert, whether it was an amber or silver alert or something like that gets put up on those particular billboards.
Okay, Sharice.
Hi, Brian. I think what I would like to ask regarding the system audits. And it says shall be conducted on regular basis by ALPR system administrator at minimum. And number 2 says will be performed by 2 people, at least one of whom shall not be police department employee. Could you give me more of an idea of who would fill that and what is the safeguard of making sure that that person who might also see confidential information, so to speak, what is the safeguard that they will not leak that information? Is there one?
So with regards to that, you see it's written in such a fashion because of what we weren't 100% sure who actually might fill that role. As of now, I've had preliminary conversations with Human Rights and Equity Officer Carla Boyd to sit in. So if we have one of our people, whoever that is, that ultimately would become the czar of this LPR system, and then Carla, and they would be able to do the audit. Carla sees all kinds of sensitive information in her role currently, and I think she understands that. I don't know that we have written specifically in there, and thou shalt not say anything to anyone provision of the policy. I think throughout the whole thing, it talks about being confidential with this particular information, and that would be the case with at least with Carla, who's, like I said, we've had some preliminary talks with.
Okay, thank you.
I see a lot of hands still up. I'll try and go in somewhat the order we did before. I think it was James, Chris, Mary Alice, Jaya. So if you want to start us out, James.
I think Jaya was up next. I've gone before.
I'll try to be quick if that's okay. Is that okay, Grace, if I?
Yes. We got it once. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this was going back to the FOIA question. So even with the license plate being redacted, the back of a car, if it's got bumper stickers or, a license plate holder that's specific could still be identifiable for a specific car. Are those things that would be able to be redacted as well?
can certainly think that through. I've not necessarily thought about that because the ones I've actually dealt with have not included those kinds of things. I think it would have to go back to, a review of the statute, any opinions or potential case law that actually touches on the idea of what could reasonably be related to, the individual as looking at some particular item is whether or not that can be determined. I think it would depend on what the nature of it is.
And then actually, since everybody's gone once, I'll jump in real quick with a comment question on that line too, because I'm looking at some of the images that you provided from Rantoul and just wondering how you think it's a portion of the vehicle. And most of them I see the full vehicle. And I mean, I can read other stuff on the vehicle that isn't taken off, like a truck that says since 1969. And I can see the type of vehicle it is, if it's got a BMW decal on the back. When I'm driving, my dog's head would be hanging out the window and it would be very easy to tell who it was. So I guess I'm just wondering any precautions for removing that kind of stuff, as was already asked, and concerns about someone being able to request like one location, and they could, in a sense, track, people who are going past this location. If say there was, a camera close to the courthouse or a certain location, it seems like the public could request that and get pretty identifiable information about the vehicles. So I'm just wondering if you have more thoughts on that.
Yeah, certainly a couple things, I guess. I'm not sure that a particular dog's head out a window would lead to a conclusion that it's a particular person driving the vehicle. As far as, determining which people are driving by a camera headed to the courthouse, I don't think, and again, I'll touch on the idea of, as I said, a portion of the vehicle. You can't see all four sides of the vehicle. You may be able to see two sides of it from the rear and maybe one side of it that's actually facing the camera, but not the entirety of it, which, as I said, is a portion of the vehicle, not the entire vehicle. If an individual knows, the vehicle enough because they park next door to their house, and so they know that there are particular stickers on a particular vehicle, again, I suppose that's a possibility, but again, doesn't necessarily mean that many people may not have the same sticker on their vehicle, may not have the same type of vehicle. The fact that it has a BMW logo on it doesn't necessarily signify who the owner is, who the driver is. Just is a signifier that may be the nature of that particular make and model of vehicle. If a person knows enough about them, if there's not a particular decal indicating the make or model on the vehicle itself. And so, I would hesitate to suggest that merely seeing a sticker or a particular thing that's not redacted on an image or portion of an image of a vehicle is going to lead to a conclusion of who's actually driving it or who's the registered owner. And again, I want to qualify that the registered owner may not be the driver, and so again, the information that's suggested here that you're going to glean from any particular image or what can be seen in that image, I think is a little bit attenuated from knowing, well, I know that's exactly who the driver is of that vehicle because I see that vehicle all the time. I just don't know that that's actually going to exist.
Okay, James?
My question is not related to the FOIA part of it, but I do want to ask Chief Seraphim if he has thought about, we've talked about the policy and managing the data and protecting the data. I think that's good. I really appreciate the evolution we've had there. Have we thought about what is our measure 6 months from now or 9 months from now of whether we believe we've been successful? So is there, we're going to have a metric of, success items for the system. And likewise, I really feel to address some of the concerns of the public, we also need to have a metric of negative impacts, if that's possible. And I'm just curious what thoughts you might have on that.
Sure, and we have had some thoughts. As you've heard me say, this is the 5th City Council meeting. You folks have considered this. We've had 2 town hall meetings, and this exact question was asked during those. So yes, we have thought about it. we will have records that will help us to determine, at least if we do have a negative encounter, any action that's taken on an LPR alert will result in documentation of some sort. So we believe we'll have that. With regards to whether or not there's a success, I asked this at the city council at the town hall meetings. I don't know that I can tell you exactly what it is. Is it going to be a reduction in shootings? Is there going to be so many arrests? Or maybe it's one arrest for one family in a particular case that was extremely meaningful. I don't know that I can tell you exactly what that measure is. And I don't know that I would set an arbitrary sort of number as, well, I think it should be 10%. Then we'll know it's successful. We've talked about all these things. And so I think there's a couple different things we could look at. But clearly to me, I think is there impact, at least on some of these events, some of these meaningful events, and was it useful in those?
Okay, and you know, we've had a lot of public input. We've heard from a lot of people. One of the concerns that is elevated from some of the stories that we've heard is what I would call use of force in conjunction with a situation that was driven by a license plate recognition identification of a vehicle. And so if I understand our use of force policy, the display of a weapon would be considered one tier, one step in our use of force model. I'm curious, as far as potential negative impacts, can we track LPR triggered events that have a correlation with a use of force that did not result in an arrest, right? What I would consider to be the most kind of negative impact on public safety for someone who should not have been in that circumstance, but the LPR, for whatever reason, leads to an investigation that has that happen. Is that something is possible?
Yes. And so, for instance, that somebody has a set of twins and they share a car, and twin X was the bank robber, and we stop the car and it's the red Chevrolet and it's the same physical description, and they point their guns and they call him back and they take him into custody and they realize, oops, it's the other twin, wrong guy, and then we would have to release them. So yes, we would have that information.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Chief and Dave, I've got a few questions. These are minor issues, but I just want to try to blow through these real quick. Automated license plate readers were discussed and funded for parking enforcement on June 22nd, 2020. What is the status of the license plate reader system for parking enforcement? Is it in use now, and will it be paired with the new system?
Well, I know poor Dave wasn't here then. And I remember this, I remember this coming up, Chris, and I do not believe that passed, but maybe the mayor, or if there's somebody else on here that knows, can advise.
I don't know if Elizabeth is actually still here or not, but LPRs were funded for parking enforcement, but they have not been implemented yet. And there is no intention, if the LPR system, the ALPR system passes for use under the police department's purview, that they would be linked.
Okay, thank you. If an outside agency such as ICE makes a FOIA request for ALPR data or gets a subpoena for ALPR data, how will the city respond?
Now, I don't think there's any differentiation in the act about the idea of who the actual requester is. My operation in terms of the nature of these kinds of things is to be consistent. Because I think if you're not consistent, then you get yourself hung up at some point in time as well. Why did you do it for them and not for us? And so because the act doesn't differentiate, I would not differentiate either, regardless of the nature of the agency. Certainly the chief can kind of comment from his perspective because, in a sense that is a law enforcement entity, I guess. But at least from my perspective, I would want to be consistent about, the release of information.
Probably redacting all license plates no matter what, right? Okay. Since Urbana would openly share access to the ALPR data with surrounding law enforcement agencies, how would the Urbana Police Department enforce Urbana's ALPR policies upon all of those other agencies? Can the Urbana Police Department track all outgoing data and ensure that it isn't used in ways that we don't want it to be used?
So I'm not sure I track all outgoing data. So it is my understanding that we would be able to audit who's making entries and queries. If, for instance, Champaign wants to use it for ordinance violations, which they don't, I've read their policy. I suppose they could make a query about trying to figure out if car X went through any of Urbana's LPR stations in regards to a barking dog ticket. I can assure you they have other more pressing things to do. We did in our policy write that with regards to Urbana officers that they would take into account our standard that it has to at least be an arrestable offense, that we won't do petty offenses. We're not going to do traffic tickets. We're not going to do ordinance violations. We're not going to do business offenses. Any of those things we won't do. And so the officers, that direction is in the policy now.
Yeah, I saw that, Chief, and I appreciate you guys doing that. Last question. If the council intends that changes in the ALPR policy should come back to the council, should we write the policy into the city code? And that's my last question.
I guess I haven't really thought about that before. And my initial reaction to that is, as with a lot of these different things, the policies are operational. That's why we're bringing it here. If we had to come back and make a small change, I know I would not necessarily want to bring this whole thing back to the city council. That's my honest assessment.
Jaya?
I feel the need to go back to the question about FOIA for the pictures. Thinking about the fact that if a camera is in a set place and someone is stalking someone, this is an area that I work with folks on very regularly, just having an image of when a car is leaving a set location is a significant risk. So I'd like to hear more about what protections would be put in place for community members who might be concerned about having someone stalk them, who would then have access to these images, even without a license plate of a vehicle, because we're talking about narrowing it down to specific locations. I'd like to know what protections would be put in place to keep people from being at further risk of stalking.
I think what that really comes down to is the concept of, the issue that's kind of been discussed on a regular basis with regard to this, and that is the idea of personal privacy. There are some exemptions that really apply to an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, and the AG requires that you have to be pretty specific and somewhat factual in aligning the basis for use of the exemption with the nature of what the request is. And so there's probably going to be a little bit more to the idea of that than there would be just in a normal situation, I suppose, in terms of the nature of a generalized request for, those particular images. I will share that there was one request that said I wanted to search for a particular license plate number. There is a case that talks about the public body is not required to do a search based upon a piece of information that's actually exempt, right? And would be redacted from the record. Because in the sense is if you're releasing a record based on that kind of a search, then the redaction becomes immaterial. It loses the nature of what it's for. And so let's say an individual says it's former X that they're trying to stalk. I know her license plate number. Shouldn't say it's automatically a her, that would be stalked, but and so I submitted a FOIA request for all images of this particular license plate number. We would not have to comply with that particular request because that license plate number is actually exempt. And so, ultimately nothing would be released, at that point related to that kind of a request.
James?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that based on this conversation about the images, if the reason for the exemption and the reason for being able to block out the license plate number, I'm going to say that it's really too hard to identify what part of the image is uniquely identifying in a way that would create a dangerous situation. And so I would hope that we would investigate denying any request for an image for that reason, because we don't know what the identifying factor might be. It might not be uniquely identifying, but it might be enough to create the dangerous situation that Jay is referring to, but which is a real thing and cannot be ignored. So I know, Dave, you're just talking about what's gone forward with Rantoul. I have to assume and hope that this is one of the reasons why the legislature was considering doing this. I know there's been significant trouble with the tollways and the use of images that the tollways collected, and their somewhat fickle approach to when they release that information and when they don't, and when they sell it to lawyers, for example, and when they don't. And so I hope we take the most expansive view of protecting individual privacy if we have to make that decision.
Thank you. Are there other questions for staff available at this time? Yes, Sharice?
I'd like to make a motion for ordinance number 2021-09-044, and ordinance revising FY 2022 annual budget amendment number 3, be moved to City Council for approval.
I'll second.
Moved by Sharice, seconded by Mary Alice. And discussion. Yes, Sharice.
Okay, I would first like to say something regarding Sarah Nixon's statement about deception and regarding the petition that Linda Turnbull and myself brought forward to City Council. And the first thing I want to say is, first of all, there was no deception. We actually wanted CCTV cameras. So we wanted to catch people in the act of doing whatever they could do. That was number one. After having a meeting with the mayor and staff, myself, we kind of settled on ALPRs because of the number one, the cost would be less. Number two, we became worried about people feeling over surveilled, or therefore maybe that their privacy was invaded just doing regular things. And it came to a consensus that it would probably actually be less invasive going with ALPRs, and it would definitely be cheaper. There was not any deception. There was not any means of all of a sudden, we represented one thing and then we purposefully and conspiratorially set again to make it into something else. That was an evolution of sorts based on how we felt that we could best serve the community and try to keep it as unbiased as possible. Because Linda and I's argument was that cameras aren't biased. Cameras show you what they show you. And if we had our druthers, it probably would have been CCTV. But we also have to consider, and at least I have to consider, not just as a community member, but as a council person, the costs entailed in trying to do such an endeavor. So that's number one. The other thing that I wanted to say is basically this, and I've actually prepared something to say. And that it seems to me that the unaffected citizens are arguing more in favor of a normalization of this violence than the most affected citizens of this violence. The misuse of authority in other cities can always be argued and debated, as well as the pros and cons of that history regarding the city of Urbana. We can do that till the cows come home. However, I reject the belief by some that it means the city do nothing to keep a portion of our citizens safe by not using the present available technology to investigate or solve crimes done against our citizens. I reject that even after decades of dealing with gun violence on the North End, that it is normal or okay for our neighborhood and others that are now contending with the same violence to just sit and wait for the many programs that mentor, provide after-school activities, and assist job training to take root, let alone solve the problem of gun violence and other crimes that we are dealing with now, today. I have stated several times that the use of ALPRs is not the sole solution to this problem, but an additional tool to be used in conjunction with whatever other assistance or other plans that may be put forth so that, or that may already exist. Every option is on the table, but more of the more than 200 plus gun crimes that have occurred in our area, and that's meaning Champaign and Urbana, we are woefully behind in solving who is the perpetrator or perpetrators. And of course, most, whether one wants to admit it or not, just see it as a Black community problem, which may or may not be true because there's no evidence or witnesses that will back up that speculation. It is assumed because that type of violence has been normalized in communities of color, just as it can be presumed that the perpetrator was Caucasian if the shooting were to take place at a school. I feel strongly that we need immediate help in solving these matters so that the many plans, assistance, and mentoring programs can make a difference in people's lives now, as they have before. Yes, believe it or not, there have been, and there are still many mentoring assistance and job programs that have been successful with change in the community, and the Old Guard in my community know that. Which brings me to the petition brought to council in June. Do the signatures of the 403 people not count? Is it that a chosen few that they seem to know better what to do for the most affected citizens than those who signed the petition? Is there something of a 3/5 rule that has been applied? To my fellow council members, would you be more inclined to regard our requests if we had 600 or 700 signatures? Would we be people to you then? I have observed with sorrow in my heart how the local Black community has been used as a political ping pong ball for everyone else to debate this point. Even using other Black communities and other states while totally disregarding the one right here. This problem was not even a thought bubble on any agenda until it was brought forth to council by me and Linda Turnbull. Is it because it was members of the Black community that brought it? We came demanding something to be done immediately and not with hat in hand. While it is true that not everyone is on board with the ALPRs, I cannot think of a time when everyone has ever been on board in a community of the disenfranchised. Not everyone was on board with Denmark Vesey. Not everyone was on board with Nat Turner. Not everyone was on board with Malik Shabazz. And not everyone was on board with Martin Luther King. This is what I know. I know that law enforcement does not know who's perpetrating the gun violence, nor do they have enough information to investigate who might be. I know that I don't know who is perpetrating these crimes either, but I do have a rough idea of who's doing most of the dying and getting injured. And I have a rough idea of those that are enduring the fear imposed on them by the people that are causing the violence to continue. And it's not the invasion of privacy crowd. I know that as a group, communities of color have been forced to endure fear from all angles, but we have rejected being prisoners in our own homes until now. It is time for all of Urbana to make a concerted effort to rid our city of this fear. We cannot grow as a community, nor can we succeed as the community that we all claim to be if we allow this violence to continue with impunity. It is my hope that this ordinance will be passed so that the city may be allowed to, quote, use all methods and methodologies at our disposal to make our communities safe for everyone. And that quote is from a resolution to eradicate structural racism in the city of Urbana. And I need for everybody to think about that. And instead of listening to folks on public input that just throw up accusations and speculations about what's going on, you have to consider the fact that what you are doing in doing that is normalizing trauma within our community. This is something that we've had to deal with, not just recently, we've been dealing with it for several decades, and it's been normalized. And there is now a technology that may help us find who is doing this, who's perpetrating these crimes. And it's important to me, and it should be as important to anybody else on city council, because I plan, what my long-term plans have been since before I even got on city council, was that we have some growth here on the north end of town, that we have an ability to actually add jobs to have revenue in our city, that we have something over here on the north end, essential services that are needed. And I do not see that any developer or anybody else will be happy to set up shop over here on this side of town for essential services if we have to contend with the violence that we've had to contend with for the past couple of years. That's it.
Okay, Chris, is our hand up next?
Yeah, the public should know that this council completely cares about Sharice Hersey's concerns about the violence in that community. I've been watching the violence since about 2014, and neither city council in Champaign or Urbana ever did a damn thing about it. They tried Fresh Start. That failed miserably, and there's been no analysis why that failed so miserably. So I agree completely with Councilman Hersey that something has got to be done. And something that we do has got to work. I've asked for the number of arrests attributable to these ALPRs. I've asked for the number of arrests for violent offenses attributable to these ALPRs. I've asked for the number of arrests of shooters attributable to these ALPRs. And I've asked for the amount of decrease of shots fired incidents in cities that have these ALPRs. Everyone from the state's attorney assumes that these LPRs are going to do something. What do they do? I don't have the evidence, and I'm not going to stick cameras around Black neighborhoods without knowing that it's going to help these communities facing this gun violence. I had a shooting two houses down from mine, so I have a little taste of what it's like to have bullets flying near your house. But I'm not going to equate that with what's going on in Ward 3 or the other hot spots in Urbana. I mean, you know, what I think we should do is commission an independent study by the University of Illinois to measure the effectiveness of these ALPRs on gun violence and what effect ALPRs have on minority communities. If an independent study were to come back and say good things happen because of the ALPRs, I'll help install the license plate readers myself. Like everybody, I want the shootings to stop, period. And I'm not willing to wait around for another tragedy so police can maybe haul somebody to jail if that's what ALPRs do. I want to go at these shooters right now before anything else happens. So I would rather, support the Richmond, California plan. And the bottom line is I'm not going to foist false solutions on Ward 3 or other communities. The pain and suffering is too great to fool them once again. I really think we should have a study first. And if it comes back great, let's do it.
Okay, thank you. Next, I saw Chandra's.
I had a couple questions for Sharice. She mentioned having discussions with staff. Were other options discussed during that meeting with staff? You went in with the idea of live feed cameras. Did staff suggest anything else before you landed to ALPRs?
We discussed the gunshot detectors. We discussed ALPRs. We discussed all those as well as surveillance cameras. The issue that I had with gunshot detectors specifically was basically that you end up with the same kind of evidence that you ended up with now. Okay, so we know where there were gunshots, and then the police show up and they find casings, and that's about it.
So you just discussed technology, police technology.
We just discussed technology. We also discussed people that have Ring doorbells. And my issue that from talking with my neighbors that have Ring doorbells or that have cameras is that they are more afraid of someone actually being able to determine where that perspective is, even if it's shown, like if it shows anybody. My experience with my neighbors that have Ring doorbells is that oftentimes nothing comes up because they only flash by maybe 30 seconds. And then, no matter going even as far as half hour before an incident happened and a half hour after, they don't always catch something because their motion, what do you call it? Motion sensitive. And so sometimes something will get caught and sometimes nothing will get caught. It depends, I think, on the distance.
So, okay, you've mentioned sort of the voices with the petition. We've gotten a lot of emails in opposition, the petition in opposition. Are we supposed to ignore those voices? We haven't, as Chris mentioned, no single crime has been solved but for LPRs. And I personally asked for the meeting's council goals and priorities 6 months ago. And like you, I came into city council with, with ideas of what I'd like to see accomplished. So it wasn't like none of us came in with, these ideas or wanting to address things like gun violence. That's been top of mind for me as well. And we have like $6 million sitting in the bank and we haven't even spent a minute talking about it. That is money that can be used to treat the root cause of gun violence. Everyone keeps saying that it's not or or situation. It's a both. But we haven't spent any time discussing what the other part of this is: reinvesting in the community, funding these programs. You want services in the third ward? We have to, get to the people and figure out. We have to get to the people and help them so that they're not perpetuating violence or the trauma that is going on around in more than just Ward 3. It's all over the city and all over the state, the country. It's escalating everywhere. But I've wanted to talk about these priorities for 6 months, but I've been told to wait and wait and wait. And finally, we have something on the schedule. Awesome, but we're wanting to address this problem now. My suggestion, I would like to see, you mentioned trauma response. Why don't we fund CU Trauma and Resiliency? They have, they want to expand their capacity. I just looked at a presentation from Karen Sims recently, and they have evidence-based, data-driven solutions, but they can't reach the audience they need to reach without funding. So, I would, put a friendly amendment to change it from funding ALPRs to funding CU Tri, and, put it in the same parameters, give this a year and see what happens. Because we have not seen strong evidence that says ALPRs work to solve gun violence specifically. You may have
it's not about just solving gun violence. It's solving crime.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. Excuse me. As Brian said earlier, it's so statistically insignificant, the number of crimes solved by the use of ALPRs. So we have been doing surveillance since the end. All this time, 30 years you mentioned, and that hasn't worked. So how about looking to invest in our community and people and help them, figure out and just instill more hope in our community? That is the problem. That is the root cause of, violence. Someone mentioned poverty. We need to invest in the people. I cannot see myself voting for this without having something else with it to vote for. And it's my suggestion that we fund CU Tri and do that trauma-informed work in our community.
Okay, and Chandra, all I'm saying is that I don't see why that both can't be done, because I don't see why they can't work hand in hand. And I use the word conjunction, which means and. It isn't this or that. It is a this and that.
Okay, but no one has made the motion to put both of them on the table at the same time.
What I'm more concerned about is people actually being able to see somebody be held accountable for the deaths in this community, in Urbana, period. And I know we need to extend the time. So I'll make a motion to extend the time.
Thank you for catching that up, paying attention to the time. I was just going to say, as chair, point of order, I would like to let council members each get a chance to speak, especially short on time, before getting back and forth. And thank you for the motion to extend the time. And did you say till what time, Sharice?
Till 11.
I'll second.
Second, thank you. And I think we need a roll call. Is that correct? Could we have a roll call, please, to extend until 11?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
Yes.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colasetti,
Yes.
Ms. Bishop,
Yes.
Ms. Wilkin,
Yes.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we can continue with council discussion comments. I would like to get a chance to hear from everybody if it's possible to make it brief and stick to one speaker at a time. Go ahead, Jaya.
I appreciate CU Tri being brought up this evening. I was actually listening to a presentation with Karen Sims and some other folks talking about, including actually Professor Nathan Stevens, who was the former director of the the Bruce D. Nesbitt African American Cultural Center. I had the pleasure of working with him at the university. They were talking as part of the News, Brews, and Beats series with WIL, a presentation called It Takes a Village, What CU is Doing to Combat Gun Violence. I think it's very unfortunate that it overlapped with this event because they had a lot of really important trauma-informed and evidence-based suggestions that it could have informed this conversation. And I do think that expertise that we see with CU Tri is a real asset in our community. I think it's worth noting, right, as community members have been saying, we were elected to represent our community, right? And that includes all the folks who have signed petitions for ALPRs, against ALPRs, all of the emails that we have received. Yes, we have had 5 meetings and 2 town halls. This topic matters. This is really, really important. And I will say I've heard from folks on all different perspectives of this issue. I will say that for folks in Ward 4, the majority I've heard from though are against the implementation of ALPRs. And that even so is not something I took lightly. I did look at the literature, looked at what evidence was out there to suggest whether this might or might not work, because this is such a serious topic. There is academic research. It looks like ALPRs were first developed back in the 1970s. This is not something that came out of nowhere. This is not new technology, but what the research does show is that they don't work. And I don't take that lightly when we're trying to find a solution to something that I absolutely agree. We should have been paying attention to this for years. It is not okay. It is not fair that just as soon as it starts coming close to campus, people start paying attention. That was one of the things that stood out to me in the bit that I did watch this evening, is Professor Stevens was talking about it's only when things come close to campus in college towns where people start paying attention. And that is not okay. This is something that a number of council members have been saying they wanted to see addressed even before now. And so we need to stop just waiting around for a solution. We need short-term and long-term solutions. There's no question to that. But I think the question of why this short-term solution is a valid one. I'm invested in looking at a short-term solution that is actually going to work. I mentioned last week that this is not something that's abstract for me either. I understand that there are parts of our community that are hearing and experiencing gun violence more regularly. But in addition to the 2 events I mentioned last week, we heard shots near my house over the weekend. And quite frankly, it might have been the same shots other folks were talking about. I heard gunshots while we were sitting here today. This is not something that is abstract. This is something that's impacting real people in our community, but it's something that deserves a response that actually works. And one of the things that stood out to me in our conversation tonight with our guest speaker, Brian Hofer, I think is how you say his name, is that it's selling false hope. It is doing a disservice to our community to put something in front of them that our own police department very accurately, and I appreciate the transparency, has said does not deter or prevent gun violence. I'm committed to actually addressing and preventing gun violence, and this is not a tool that's going to do this. And the idea that cameras equal safety, I would push back on that too. I talked to a lot of students when I worked at the university, students of color who did not feel safe on their own college campus. And that is it's not a unique experience. The cameras do not necessarily equal safety. And I'm, like I said, devoted and committed to being part of something that not only looks at those deep, long-term projects to fix this problem, but also something that is more immediate, that will actually work.
Thank you. Mary Alice?
Thank you. So I've been spending a lot of time listening to a lot of people. I've been reading a lot of information. I have to disagree a bit with Jaya about the research. I think that in terms of what we are hoping these ALPRs will do, has not really been studied thoroughly. So I've tried to write down and summarize all of my thoughts on this process. So I wrote all of my stuff down, so hopefully I'll hit all the points. And some of them will be a repeat of what we've heard. So let me start out by saying that the reason ALPRs are being considered is because of a grassroots organization by people who are most affected by the current gun violence in our community, wanting surveillance cameras. It has taken 5 months for City Council to come to a vote. City staff have done everything that has been asked of council members, holding 2 public meetings, crafting a policy for the use, following up with other communities who have used these devices. This is a 1-year program. What I hear tonight, what I've heard in the past, is where's the evidence? Locally, in the past several months, there have been 2 instances of locating and arresting individuals that have been suspected of gun violence. One just this past weekend, where an individual was arrested for armed robbery based on surveillance cameras and ALPRs. Nationally, I've shared information. It's the only thing I have been able to find that specifically addresses gun violence. There was a city council in Florida that published every single use and every single arrest of ALPRs. In 18 months, they had 18 serious violent and serious crimes that were solved by the help of ALPRs, including 1 sexual assault, 5 gun and homicide incidents. I want to remind the council of the horrific death of Ying Ying Zhang, where the break in this case was due to a surveillance camera, which identified the car that picked her up. This murderer was actively searching for new victims on our campus. Without this tool, Urbana-Champaign may have had an active serial killer on our campus. I asked City Council this: what is success? Is it 1 case? Is it 2 cases? Is it 50 cases? Is it 100 cases? If we solve 1 case, is that worth $50,000? We have heard concerns from the community on how these devices would be used, how long the data will be stored, who will have access to the data, how will the hits be used, how will we prevent stopping people who may not be involved by switching plates or mistaken read on license plates, etc. This is all covered in the policy. Mr. Hoffer tonight suggested that there was no community input into the policy. I beg to differ. We've included that people who violate the rules shall be subject to discipline. We've added a person outside of the police department to be involved in the audit that will be conducted twice a year. The policy is not the place that we would put a report in. We have an annual police report, and I fully expect that there will be an analysis of the ALPRs in this annual report. A lot of the concern has been around misidentification, and I want to quote from the policy here. ALPR hits alone do not constitute reasonable suspicion or probable cause for a stop. Prior to taking enforcement action or initiating a traffic stop on an ALPR hit, in all circumstances, an officer shall visually confirm that a motor vehicle's license plate number and their vehicle description matches the license plate number and the vehicle description recognized by the ALPR system, including both the alphanumeric characters of the license plate as well as the state of issuance, and verify that the hit of the license plate per query of the Illinois Law Enforcement Agency's data system and or the National Crime Information Center before taking enforcement action. Currently, the county and Rantoul have these devices in place. The university has plans to have these devices in place. On the U of I campus, we have over 2,000 surveillance cameras. Do we want Urbana to be the void where people who conduct gun violence can easily hide or be harder to track down? I want to specifically address the form email that many of us have been sent. I have 109 of them in my inbox. I counted them. Suggestions, according to this email, are, quote, to reduce gun violence, we are to fund programs that address the root causes of local gun violence, poverty, inequity, fear, and lack of opportunity. That's what the email says. The city is already committed to fund youth programs at $100,000. We have $2 million set aside for infrastructure projects targeted to underserved neighborhoods. In addition, we will have the opportunity to leverage $6.5 million of the American Rescue Plan, a process that we approved back in August that should be set to start very soon. $2.97 million in housing opportunities. Combined, this is potentially $11.6 million. $54,000 of this proposal is equivalent to 0.05%. All the suggestions proposed by this mass letter do not help us solve an active gun violence situation. When a crime happens, we must have investigative tools. Let me be clear, I don't believe this is going to be a deterrent. ALPR is not the cure, it is a tool. Tonight, we have the options of lifting the voices of over 526 people. There's 2 different petitions out there who have asked the city to install automatic license plate holders or surveillance cameras. This council has combed through many issues that have arisen, and I believe we have put in place several safeguards around the misuse of these devices, including adding the auditing procedure. Urbana residents have been terrorized and are begging for a solution and immediate action. People are dying and families are forever altered. My vote tonight is to say that I'm listening, I'm acting on these voices that we have all been hearing, and that we will do everything to prevent gun violence in our community. Will this solve the issue? Probably not. Will it help the issue? It probably will. I ask my fellow council members to take all of this into consideration. Don't silence the 526 voices.
Okay, James?
All right, thank you. I don't need to reiterate the message that Therese made earlier about normalization of this violence. That really resonated with me because that is something that is raised in my consciousness as we've been having this discussion, which is the act to attempt to take someone else's life should not be normalized. In my ward, Ward 7, I'm seeing the same kind of things that you're seeing. I'm seeing letters from people about this. For my ward, Ward 7, I see 3 letters or emails in favor for every 2 that I see against. So it's a close thing, but it's leaning in support of it. I believe this is, I'm going to vote for this tonight because this puts it on the agenda for our city council meeting next week so that we can vote on whether we actually do it or not. It's time. We've spent our time on this. I can't hear someone say they want to do something about it and say they want to wait for a study at the University of Illinois. I don't think those are congruent. I don't think they line up. And I do hear several people saying, we don't want it to be this or that. We want it to be multiple things. But if this thing goes ahead, that means that I'm not going to get the things I want, so I'm going to stop this thing. That's what I'm hearing. I think it's time we put this on the agenda next week. I'm going to vote for it. I'm going to vote for it next week as well. I'm going to be a skeptic. I think it's a tool that we can use. I'm going to be one of the people measuring success and measuring the failures of the tool so that when we are, if we do it, 6 months or 9 months down the road, we can be part of the answer as to whether it helped or not as we tried. And so that's where my position is. I do appreciate everyone coming to this and bringing their perspective. I really value that. Something I appreciate about this council, that despite some errors in communication and some miscommunication, everyone still seems to be trying to share their perspective and be respectful at the same time. I do appreciate that, but that's where I'm at. Thank you.
I think we've heard from all council members. That I'd like to add a comment, and I see the mayor's hand up if we have time. I would just like to say for my comment that I have listened to every piece of input from the
Grace, you need to transfer the chair if you're going to enter into discussion.
Well, I thought it was back and forth, but I'm happy to. Would you be willing to take the chair during my comment, Mary Alice?
Sure, and the chair recognizes Grace.
Thank you. I have listened to every piece of input from the public, community leaders, and other sources of information from diverse demographics and people of different backgrounds, experiences, and neighborhoods. And there are a lot of different perspectives and opinions in the community. There are individuals and organizations on both sides of the issue from all walks of life that I've seen. There are multiple Black-led organizations that have been speaking out against the ALPRs and organizing against them with various meetings of listening sessions and events, like one that just happened this evening. And the part I did get to listen to before we started was Black community members, leaders, and experts discussing alternative approaches to community safety and the harms caused by the punitive system of policing and sentencing during the war on drugs, which is continuing and we're still barely recovering from. I understand and agree with the urgent need to address community violence and increase safety, and that important lives are on the line. And I agree with long and short-term solutions that are way past overdue. I think these needed to happen a long time ago. I agree with that. And that we need to start now and move as quickly as possible. However, I don't believe the ALPRs are a good, even short-term solution because we have not seen their effectiveness. And I think even more so than that, or with that, that they could cause potential serious harm to community members. And I don't believe that we should experiment with people's safety when there are such potential harms involved and we're not sure of the effectiveness. I do not fully support ALPRs, but I do fully support other programs that could be potentially more effective and have less harmful potential consequences that would address the same things that ALPRs are supposedly doing of addressing, one, retaliatory gun violence, and two, the issues of solving violent crime with the lack of community cooperation with police for solving crimes or other evidence. And with that, ALPRs alone do not count, so the system still depends on community members reporting a crime or other evidence or cameras. I think there are other ways to address those issues that may be more effective, safer, and a step towards long-term community safety by taking immediate steps in the right direction. I believe that there are too many issues with our current system in police oversight and accountability, like issues with our use of force policy, CPRB review, racial disparities in traffic stops, arrests, and sentencing, and many more issues that I cannot believe that this tool would have transparency, oversight, and accountability and be able to ensure public safety and equity. I think a violence interrupters type model with mental health services, grief counseling, street outreach, and addressing the immediate issues with gun violence could be more effective to address that retaliatory violence and lack of cooperation with the community about evidence to a crime. And I definitely understand and hear the issue of something like that taking too long, but fortunately we don't have to start from zero. We have people, organizations, and experts and elected officials who have been working in this for quite a while and have knowledge and resources to help address it. Like CU Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, I sent you guys the slides of a particular program they're working on just for this that is already a year or two of traction without any funding from municipal organizations. So I think there's real opportunities there, and I would much rather do that than see the ALPRs. If we're going to try something, I think there are other things that we could try that could potentially be more effective and would pretty certainly be safer. And I think that if we want to start looking at short-term solutions to address the cycles of retaliatory violence, that's great. And let's do that. And let's assess community costs and benefits of multiple approaches, not just consider this one option. And with that, I'm finished, and I'd be happy to take the chair back, Mary Alice.
Yep, the chair's all yours.
Thank you. And we're doing direct for a vote. Mayor, did you have something that you haven't already said or emailed us? You're muted.
I emailed you information, but I'm going to say it as well, or at least a summary of that. First of all, I want to address the belief that nothing has been done about gun violence until we started talking about it in the last few months. I served as a city council member on the steering committee for the CU Fresh Start initiative from the time it started. There have been hundreds and hundreds of people working for the past 10 or more years addressing gun violence. There have been dozens of community programs established and hundreds of millions of dollars invested in this effort. So to say that we're suddenly just starting to address gun violence as a community, the Community Coalition and many other organizations have been working. CU Trauma and Resiliency Initiative, I believe, was fostered through the Community Coalition and certainly was topic of conversation at many, many meetings. So we have been working on the gun violence issue as a community challenge for many years. Information I provided to the council this afternoon, I want to summarize. First of all, I believe the best data, the most effective measure of the effectiveness of these ALPRs is in what's happening locally and what has happened recently. We look at Rantoul because Rantoul is the community closest to us who has installed these readers since this summer. I sent you links to examples of cases where arrests have been made in multiple shootings and in the recent motel holdup over the past weekend. And as was pointed out by the state's attorney, they're able to charge only 25% of shots fired cases in this county because they can't determine who the shooters are. No one has ever claimed that the ALPRs will deter gun violence, but we do believe that it will help identify who's involved in the shootings and help disrupt this pattern of retaliatory violence. Secondly, you have a policy in front of you. We listened to the community. We incorporated many of the safeguards and oversight that you requested. The budget amendment that you're going to vote on, and that's what's on the agenda, and that's what you'll be voting on tonight, is for approximately $50,000 in funding for a one-year contract to install approximately 20 license plate readers. If you want a study of the effectiveness of the readers, the study should start the day we install them and continue for a year. That is the study, that's the data that provides the information that's going to be relevant to our community and to our neighboring communities. Finally, I strongly believe, and we've always taken this position, that we can choose to take this one immediate action step to help law enforcement obtain information about violent crime that the witnesses and victims are unable, unwilling, or afraid to provide. That's a short-term investigative tool that we're talking about tonight for a little over $50,000 a year for 20 cameras. And we need to invest in long-term solutions. And I'm going to summarize and I'm going to repeat some of what Mary Alice stated because it's important for people to know what we're planning to do. December 2nd and 3rd, you will participate in City Council priority setting. I fully expect that gun violence is going to be one of those top priorities, as is issues like housing, employment, infrastructure, and that sort of thing. That will set the stage for the community engagement process for soliciting proposals and allocating approximately $6.5 million in American Rescue Plan funds for those priorities that you've identified, that the staff has worked with you on and the community has helped you identify. And there's an additional $6.5 million to be available for the allocation next year, American Rescue Plan funds. We will solicit proposals and allocate $2 million to infrastructure projects, such as streetlights, such as sidewalks, such as connecting paths, handicap accessible ramps, the kinds of neighborhood-based infrastructure projects that are identified. The wheels are set in motion for that tomorrow night at the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission meeting when they talk about the structure and process for soliciting proposals for that. We will be soliciting proposals to allocate $100,000 in social service funds for youth programming. Sheila Dodd gave a presentation on that last week. We also need to prepare an action plan and allocate close to $3 million in home grant funds. This is the Housing Opportunities Made Equal American Rescue Plan grant funds. The Home ARP funds target homelessness, housing insecurity, rental assistance, and supportive services to increase housing stability in the city of Urbana. This is some of the root causes of community violence that we have been talking about. And you will also be soliciting proposals to begin the community safety review through the lens of racial and social justice. That's funded by about $190,000, which was a reallocation of Urbana Police Department funds. This totals close to $18 million that you will be allocating in the next 6 months to 2 years. And I know it sounds like a long time if you've been on the council for 6 months and you've been waiting for these things to begin. But this is government. This is how it works in government. And when you're thoughtful and intentional and you set up the processes and you define your metrics and you solicit proposals from groups who are capable of carrying out what you want to do, you spend the time necessary to get it done. And that's what we're going to do. The money is there, it's committed. The commitment is there from the city, and together we can achieve what we want to achieve, but it's going to be a longer term solution. In the short term, we have an investigative tool that could help us solve some shootings, bring accountability and justice to some families, and perhaps and hopefully start to disrupt the pattern of violence that we're seeing. They are working in a nearby community. They have led to arrests. That's a start. And again, if you want a study of ALPRs, the study starts the day we install them and continues for a year. We will evaluate their effectiveness throughout the year. We will report to council. And as we get to the end of the first year, we'll do the evaluation, the benefit cost analysis, if they're worth it, if they're not. And in the meantime, we will have spent less than 0.5% of the total amount we're planning on investing in the next couple of years in the root causes of violence. So I urge you to support this, to listen to the folks who have come to you, and to most of all, it's time to make a decision on this issue and to pass this on to council with an opportunity for a vote. We'll put this out and you can, state your position in public, but the community deserves a vote on this. Thank you.
Okay, and we have 5 minutes left, so unless there's any other burning comments from council, it looks like we could maybe go for a vote on this. We have a motion by Sharice, seconded by Mary Alice, to take this budget amendment council with recommendation for approval on the regular agenda, correct? Is what's on the floor? Okay, could we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Wu,
Yes.
Mr. Evans,
No.
Ms. Hersey,
Yes.
Ms. Colacetti,
No.
Ms. Bishop,
No.
Ms. Wilkin,
No.
Mr. Quisenberry.
Yes.
Okay, and with that motion does not carry. And looks like we have 4 minutes left until 11. If anyone from council had a quick input or communication that you'd like to share in that time. I see Chandra and then Mary Alice.
I just wanted to take a moment to share my condolences about Janice Mitchell. I found out this evening that she passed. She was the leader of the Urbana Neighborhood Connections, and she would always text or email me after city council meetings to talk about what we discussed. So it's very sad for our community. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Mary Alice and then Jaya.
All right, I actually had two things, but I'll do it down to one. I wanted to give everybody an update on what progress the RPC has been able to make on rental assistance. They took our suggestions to heart, so they now have an FAQ available on their website. They have a person who's scheduled on days, which is posted on the website to offer assistance with packaging applications. They've implemented an option in a phone tree menu that now will connect you to a call group if there is somebody who is available, so you can call and ask questions. That phone number is 217-328-3313, and you need to select option number 2. And I'll hold my next one until next time.
Thank you. Jaya?
I'd like to start by also echoing what Chandra shared. It's a huge loss to our community, the passing of Janice Mitchell. So her loss will be deeply felt, especially I think by anyone who works in social services in any way. She was such an incredible presence in our community. So definitely my thoughts are with her family. I also wanted to thank the progress that's been made on the goal setting project. I know Chandra has been a very strong advocate for getting that on our, getting it scheduled for quite some time. So I appreciate that continued effort and then the work that the staff has done to make that a possibility.
Thank you. Yes, James, we got 2 minutes till 11.
Yeah, I'm just going to reiterate the loss of the community and Janice Mitchell's passing. If you want to look at someone who made opportunities for youth in this community and is the kind of light we should follow in investing in the community, you have one there, and I'm sorry for her family's loss.
Thank you. And with that, and 1 minute till 11, no other council input, we'll adjourn this meeting. See you all next week.